Chapter 412. The air supremacy near Zhe-Chio spaceport was still being contested. But when he received the signal from the Maple Forest Alliance base in the Northern Hemisphere, the Blonde Night Wolf Fleet Commander Fu Ding did not hesitate to order 10 high-speed Omni-Domain cruising fighter jets to speed towards the northeast. He did not care about the loss of ground attack power at all. The target of the fighter jets was a black mecha racing through the wilderness. This mecha was the source of the Empire military's operation this time. In the dimly lit cockpit, the smell of heavy oxygen released by the life support system was very clear. Su Li's left hand gripped the control stick tightly, while the fingers of his right hand quickly swept across the touchscreen. In an instant, he entered 14 commands to control the Black MX to perform one dangerous, yet beautiful standard evasive maneuver after another amidst the smoke and rain of bullets. The Empire's fighter jets in the night sky above his head were reflected in his eyes through the mecha's SCC system and large radius high-sensitivity radar in the helmet. When they had brushed past the northern area of Zhe-Chio spaceport earlier, these Empire's fighter jets had followed them and had been unable to shake them off. This fact made him very clear that the Empire's orbit-changing satellites were still watching him from outer space. The black box was fixed to the back of the cockpit, while Jian Shuer sat quietly beside him. It was not designed to be a two-person mecha, so the cockpit was slightly cramped. However, being chased by the Empire's fighter jets the entire way, the two of them were not in the mood to experience the stuffiness and cramping of the cockpit. Sulu was not nervous at all. He only felt that it was a little troublesome. The fighter jets in the sky did not carry electromagnetic beam bombs, so it was basically impossible for them to hurt the extremely mobile MX. However, being chased like this by the enemy made him feel as if someone was holding a gleaming dagger behind him, ready to stab him at any moment. It made him feel unusually anxious. A sharp alarm came from the radar. Su Li's fingers entered commands as fast as lightning. With a push of the control stick with his left hand, the heavy black mecha was like an extremely nimble toy under his control. On the simple dirt path that was approaching the mountain, the mecha's thick mechanical legs suddenly sprang up and swept diagonally to the right, breaking a thin tree in half. With a whoosh, a heat sensor rocket fell from the sky. Just as the black MX mecha dove into the forest, it struck the already broken thin tree. Amidst the explosion, the mountain rocks cracked and soil poured down in torrents. Very troublesome, Su Li thought silently in his heart. However, he still didn't want to use the simulation system. It wasn't because Jian Shuer was sitting right beside him. It was because the military needed his mecha to be the bait. Then, in this escape plan, they couldn't just aim to escape to Luochio Airport. The real danger was hidden in the simulation of this battle. Right at this moment, a sharp whistle rang out in the skies. A silver-white shadow rushed out from the faint clouds in the skies to the west, flying past the black mecha's head and towards the rear at high speed. The mecha's friend or foe identification system instantly determined that this was a fighter from the Federation. The black MX mech advanced at high speed without turning back. The radar transmitted the scene behind it to the holographic screen of the cockpit. Several blinding lights flashed across the night sky. It should be the large-caliber cannons firing. The Federation's fighter jet that came to support deftly lifted its angle in the air and instantly shot down the Empire's fighter jet that had been following behind Su Li the whole time. On the holographic screen, the Empire fighter fell to the ground with green smoke billowing out of it. The Federation fighter flapped its wings slightly in greeting to the mecha on the ground. A grateful smile appeared on Su Li's face. His finger tapped the touchscreen. The black mecha that was running at high speed gave a thumbs up to the night sky where the aerial battle had just occurred. However, the next moment, in the night sky behind the mecha, a few more Empire mecha joined the fray. Although the Federation mecha that had come to provide support valiantly destroyed one of the Empire mecha, it was ultimately outnumbered and turned into a firework in the night sky. The smile on Su Li's face instantly disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and continued to operate in silence. Like the Empire fleet commander, the air combat forces of the Federation's Zhe-Chio spaceport. Although they were also in the midst of a dangerous offensive and defensive battle, still sent out more than 10 fighters to cover the Black Mecha's escape. Both sides knew very well who was inside this Black Mecha and what its significance was. With the valiant cover of the Federation fighters, the Black MX mech finally shook off the pursuit and harassment of the Empire from the air. It turned into a black stream of fire, passing through the primeval forest and stepping over the Black Plains, heading towards the spaceport in the distance at high speed. There was a simple military road in the middle of the plains. The Black Mecha broke out of the forest and sprinted across the grass. The moment its heavy body landed on the surface of the road, it began to change its state. The thick alloy mechanical legs flipped over and closed together with the sound of hydraulic compression and motors. The side armor automatically pushed out a caterpillar mechanism, and the spherical joints turned into power linkage equipment. A loud grinding sound rang out on the road. The Black Mecha instantly entered full-speed movement mode. The caterpillar tracks rotated at high speed under the power of the powerful engine, tearing apart the shallow layer of hard concrete on the surface of the road. It carried with it a cloud of dust as it moved forward into the night. The Black Mecha's mode changes were all completed at high speed, without the slightest hint of deceleration. There was a palpitating sense of simplicity and beauty in its movements. The lighting in the cockpit was dim. Su-Lu operated in silence, his fingers continuously entering commands and activating buttons. Although each of his actions did not appear to be fast, when put together, there was a fairly clear sense of rhythm. No matter how difficult the operation was, he showed no signs of panic. Jian Shuier checked the high-strength laces on her body, using a smile to hide the nervousness in her heart. She reflexively turned to look at him. The two of them were sitting very close to each other. Although the lighting in the cockpit was dim, she could clearly see this man's thick, knife-like eyebrows and that pair of permanently narrowed eyes when she turned her head. The Empire's offensive is fierce. The third line of defense is having a hard time holding on, but you don't have to worry. As long as the fighters behind us can't catch up, at least on this road to Luo Chiu, our mecha will be safe. Su-Lu took off his helmet and calmed the slight feeling in his heart. He said in a low voice, "Both the Empire and the Federation have made the wrong judgment. If we go full speed ahead, I can guarantee that before the Empire breaks into this area, we will be able to send you to Luo Chiu Spaceport." He was the designer of the MX. He knew the functions of this Black Mecha better than the staff officers of the Federation's Department of Defense. Especially after discovering the small note under the right touchscreen, he had infinite confidence in this Black MX. But you and I both know that our mecha is bait. So I'm sorry. I can't go full speed ahead. You will have to continue taking risks with me. The Federal Central Computer, which was that old thing, was connected directly to Su Li's brain. He could even know everything that was happening on this planet faster than the Federation's frontline command. Although he couldn't completely understand the entire battle situation on this planet, he could at least calculate some of the problems. At least we don't have to worry about anything now. He pointed at the map on the screen and explained to Jian Shuier, "We will arrive at the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge in about 4 hours. In these 4 hours, we will be safe." "Okay." Jian Shuier nodded. She was very obedient and didn't say anything. She didn't want to disturb his operation. Ever since she had received the military's request, this national girl knew that her frontline concert tour would definitely be a journey filled with unknown dangers. Right now, she was running with Su-Lu alone on the road of escape. Naturally, she was nervous, but for some reason, seeing Su Li's silent and precise operation, her hard-to-suppress nervousness gradually calmed down. In order to conserve energy, after entering full-speed mode, Su-Lu had shut down some unnecessary functions of the mecha's life support system. The temperature in the cockpit was gradually rising, and the dim lighting seemed to contain an endless sense of dryness. "The straps can be undone. We will be safe for more than 3 hours. You can trust in my judgment." The sweat on his body had soaked his clothes. Su-Lu felt a little uncomfortable, especially with the girl's body pressed tightly against him. The feeling was slightly awkward. Jian Shuier grunted and obediently undid the straps. She didn't ask where his confidence in her safety came from. She took off the black summer jacket that Su-Lu had draped over her. Raising her arm, She wiped the sweat off her face. Because of the heat, her cheeks were flushed red. The cockpit fell silent once more. Only the low rumble of the mecha's twin engines and the occasional rise and fall of the tracks against the ground could be heard. Say something. Sulu cautiously observed the darkness around them through the automatic monitoring system. The road is still long. Jian Shuier smiled somewhat helplessly. She cupped her burning face with both hands and gently pulled back her legs. That military uniform skirt of hers was pushed up by this movement, revealing the girl's tight, smooth thighs. I'm a little nervous. The girl lowered her head and said, I don't know what to say. This is the first time I've seen a real battlefield and seen dead people. I'm very nervous too. Sulu pressed a button, allowing the MX mecha to enter a semi-automatic state. With some difficulty, he turned around and took out that black box. Lowering his head, he opened it and said, although I've seen many dead people before, this is also my first time on a battlefield. In the process of taking out the box, his body inevitably rubbed against Jian Shuier's body. That clear sliver of softness made him feel slightly flustered. If it had been a normal member of the opposite sex, perhaps he would have been able to keep his mind clear. But this was Jian Shuier. She had been his dream lover since he was young. Moreover, at the concert earlier, he had even seen such a playful and sexy side of her. Jian Shuier didn't seem to notice these problems. Fanning herself lightly with her small hands, she said in reminiscence, I've sat in a mecha before. That was a few years ago. When Li Feng was first allowed to operate a mecha, he took me in at once. She glanced at Su Li's well-defined profile, and a trace of a warm smile flashed through her bright, limpid eyes. But his piloting was very shaky. It wasn't as comfortable as yours. MX's performance is much better. Su Lu was silent for a moment before saying, and this isn't a river of cars. Chapter 413. The entire journey was silent. The beautiful girl leaned against his arm obediently. The reverberations of the road were clearly transmitted into his mind. The straight road continued forward, but unfortunately, there were no lights, no compound-powered racing cars. Only a lonely black mecha. So this was not a sightseeing tour. There was no music playing in the silent cockpit, but the humming of the engine, the soft sound of the hydraulic system, and the low and clear vibration of the metal components were like a song with a strong, heavy metal style, lingering in the ears of the young man and woman. From the corner of his eye, Su Lu saw the faint disappointment on Jian Shuier's beautiful face. He subconsciously lowered his voice and explained, this is a military mission. You're only a civilian, but you are willing to take the risk to be the bait. You're already very brave. Jian Shuier adjusted her sitting position and leaned against his shoulder shyly. After a moment of silence, she said softly, I have a military position. I am studying in the Warship Command faculty of the First Academy. Sulu was slightly taken aback. He immediately remembered that quiet afternoon 2 years ago, when this national girl seemed to have been doing a set of test papers filled with structural diagrams. Perhaps that was the entrance exam for the First Military Academy? The niece of the war god Li Pifu. Having studied in the First Military Academy, it was not surprising that she had a military identity. Since that was the case, it was only natural that she cooperated with the military. However, there was one question that had always puzzled him. Why did the Ministry of Defense let you be the bait? Why did the people of the Empire attack the South like crazy when they saw you appear on this planet? I once wondered if it was because that old man killed the previous emperor of the Empire. They have always wanted revenge, but could not find the opportunity, so they vented their anger on you. But even in the Federation, not many people know about your relationship with Feiqing, and this matter does not make sense. Su Li's finger moved the micro button, and a crisp sound rang out in the cockpit of the mecha. Whether it was studying in the university or doing other things, he was always used to silently watching and digesting the information. He rarely asked questions in rapid succession like this. Jian Shuier frowned slightly and moved her body with difficulty. Her face was full of confusion. I don't know the reason, but since the Ministry of National Defense came up with this plan, I believe they must have their reasons. She turned her head to look at Su Li's side profile and asked, I didn't ask you before we left. Actually, I also have a big question. According to the plan of the Ministry of Defense, We should be moving together with the mechanical division. Perhaps our speed will be slower, but if the Empire can really tear through the defense line, this mechanical division and your Group 7 can at least cover you for a period of time. Until the last moment when you can't hold on anymore, then you can send me to Luo Chio. Why did you go against the orders of the Ministry of Defense and take me away alone? You and I don't know where the military's confidence in this plan comes from, but since those big shots are so confident, I'm sure they'll come for you regardless of whether the Imperial Expeditionary Force can see through this trap or not. Su Le said, in that case, of course I won't go with the battalion. There will always be deaths in war, but it's always better to have fewer deaths. Jian Shuang's long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and she was silent. After confirming the real reason behind Su Le's decision, the girl felt a faint sense of respect and admiration. For Su Le, this was a very simple logical problem, but for many people, it was often inconceivable. The Federation fighter that was covering our escape was hit by the Empire. I don't know if the pilot had the chance to jump, but I think he's probably dead. Su Le narrowed his eyes and looked at the enlarged electronic map on the screen. He said softly, I've signed a contract with you on behalf of the Whitewater Company. I owe you a life. Your uncle's daughter. No matter how you look at it, I have the obligation to protect you with my life. But those Federation soldiers who don't know the inside story don't have such an obligation. Understood. Jian Shuai rubbed her slightly red cheeks, and her eyes lit up slightly. Looking at Su Le's side profile, she smiled sweetly and said, Then I'll leave my safety to you. You're welcome. A sincere smile appeared on Su Le's face, and he said, Since the great war god has entrusted this mission to me without worry, he naturally believes that on planet 5460 tonight, only I can guarantee your safety. I couldn't tell that you were such a confident person normally, murmured Jian Shuai, gazing at him thoughtfully. Everyone has their own area of expertise. For me, the MX Mecha is my world. As long as I sit in the mecha, I don't know why, but I feel confident to the point of even being a little arrogant, said Su Le to the girl beside him as he listened to the ultrasonic waves in front of them through the monitoring equipment. This was his first time on a real battlefield, but whether it was the cruel and heroic scenes of the northern battlefields transmitted by the old thing or this long and dangerous journey, none of it could disturb his calm. There was no excitement or panic in his heart, only a natural sense of familiarity with the battlefield. Li Feng also said something similar. It seems that although the two of you are polar opposites in personality, you are very similar in some aspects. Jian Shuai smiled sweetly. Her eyes narrowed in an extremely cute manner. She said, I know you designed the MX, so I'm very curious about what was written on that piece of paper. The paper is some correction parameters. Although there were hints in the system, that engineer who made the adjustments still habitually used paper to tell me these things. Su Le thought of that genius girl far away on the capital ring and said with a smile, The MX Mecha we're sitting in has already had most of its long-range firepower systems removed, and the synchronization speed of the central control system has also been slightly adjusted. This is more suitable for me to perform. Him or her. Her name is Shang Xiao, the first-level technical supervisor of Nutshell, one of the true designers of the MX. Jian Shuai used her thin index finger to brush away the slightly wet purple strands of hair beside her face. Looking at Su Le with a chuckle, she asked with a hint of innocence, Shang Xiao, what's your relationship with her? A pure relationship between a man and a woman? Su Le also narrowed his eyes as he replied with a smile. Perhaps it was the smell of smoke on this planet, or perhaps it was the dry and hot air in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was the flames of war, death, and escape he had seen along the way, but this Donglin rock suddenly found a trace of his youthful playfulness. He even dared to make such a joke in front of the woman of his dreams. However, this kind of joke was not very interesting. Jian Shuai rubbed her nose in boredom, but immediately after, because of a sudden collision between the tracks of the mecha and a protrusion on the road, she jumped up. She subconsciously let out a soft cry as she grabbed tightly onto Su Le's arm. Throughout the night, the black mecha ran silently in the night wind. The journey was peaceful, but this planet was already filled with the sorrow of death. The young man and woman in the mecha, did not want to recall the Federation mecha that had crashed into the plains, did not want to think about how many people were dying at this time, so they could only force themselves to be calm and chat. However, the sorrow of death was ultimately the starting point of panic, and the woman's panic was the source of the man's pity. Don't be afraid. You really don't have to be afraid. I'm here. He once again forcefully repeated. Su Lu felt the delicate skin and soft body of the girl beside him, but there was no desire in his heart. Just like what Uncle had taught him in the past, a normal young man who had given most of his youth to his hands would find it difficult to be lustful whenever he saw a girl he truly liked. The black MX mecha ran silently towards the northeast direction. When it was about to enter the mountainous area west of Luo Chio spaceport, he suddenly pulled on the control stick, and the mecha instantly entered a static state, looking at the latest battle situation and the detection results of this mountainous area sent by the Federal Central Computer in his left eye. Su Li's thick, knife-like eyebrows raised. His pupil shrank, and he said to Jian Shui'er beside him, "Tie yourself up tighter." Jian Shui'er was slightly stunned. Using the back of her hand to wipe away the sweat on her cheeks, she earnestly followed his instructions and carefully tied the straps around her body. She used a lot of strength to tie the straps around her body. Through the dark military uniform and short skirt, the straps slightly sank into the girl's soft body. In this dangerous and tense moment, the seductive atmosphere in the cockpit became even more intense. Su Lu quickly took off his clothes, revealing his well-proportioned and strong naked body. Forcing himself not to look at Jian Shui'er's shocked expression, he shamelessly took out the simulation system from the box and silently started to install it. Although she was sure that the boy beside her wasn't a pervert who would take advantage of the situation, Jian Shui'er couldn't help but exclaim softly when she suddenly saw him naked. She covered her eyes with her hands tightly. Her cheeks, which were originally slightly red, were now as red as an apple in autumn, glowing red and glistening. It was unknown when, but the two pairs of hands that were covering their faces had revealed a sliver of space. Occasionally, a trace of curiosity could be seen, and their eyes were filled with curiosity. Su Lu didn't know that the nation's girl beside him was peeping. Only now did he remember the problem with the simulation system. He didn't have time to deal with it, so he was too embarrassed to turn around. "It's done," he said in a low voice. Enhanced mobile platform. Jian Shui'er stared in shock at the system on Su Li's body, covering her mouth in disbelief as she exclaimed. Her voice was very soft. Su Lu was in the midst of his final preparations for the mecha battle, so he didn't hear her clearly. "If you can hold on, don't use the life support system helmet." Su Lu narrowed his eyes at the display on the holographic screen and said in a serious tone, "Later on, the tumbling will be very bad. You might vomit, and it might clog up the helmet." Jian Shui'er put down the hand she had been using to cover her mouth and nodded blankly. Only then did the orders from the Federation Command Center ring out in the mecha. "Change of plan. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. The charter has just confirmed that the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance's Moonwolf Group has broken through the defense line and infiltrated Qinggong Ridge. Command Center orders you to take Miss Jian Shui'er and immediately retreat to the southwest direction." Su Lu was silent for a moment, then abnormally cut off the communication. Under Jian Shui'er's shocked gaze, he took a deep breath, his face slightly pale, and put on the helmet. The vision of the helmet was the valley behind them. In the darkness of the night, the valley seemed abnormally quiet, but the faint sound of drums could be heard from behind the valley. War drums! It wasn't war drums, it was heavy mecha advancing at high speed. The high frequency of the alloy mecha and the rocky ground seemed to be beating on the hearts of the young man and woman. A black and green Empire mecha suddenly appeared at the mouth of the valley. The next moment, countless black and green Empire mechas surged out of the valley. Chapter 414. The Empire's Moon Wolf 3rd Generation mecha had a single jet engine and a lightweight outer armor design. Whether it was in terms of quality or firepower, it was not as good as the Federation's standard M52 series mecha. The Empire soldiers were brave and good at fighting. They could endure hardships and had amazing perseverance. In the design of the Moon Wolf mecha, they tried their best to reduce the life support system while leaving most of the power output. Therefore, the Moonwolf mecha had always been known in the universe for its high speed and light speed. Together with the black and green streamlined outer armor, it looked like an alloy spirit beast that silently moved through the forest. It was precisely because of the Moonwolf mecha's unique design and innate danger that this most powerful mecha assault force of the Empire's expeditionary force, Maple Forest Alliance, was able to take advantage of the planet's sea of fire and the desperate stalemate between the northern and southern battlefronts to follow the 17 mecha clans tore open the distorting cracks in the Iron Curtain at all costs to silently and ruthlessly penetrate deep into the southern hemisphere. They arrived at the valley of Chungong Ridge and followed the tail of the Federation's Black Mecha. Perhaps this was a trap set up by the federal military, but the Empire's Moonwolf group looked coldly at the possible ambush ahead. This was because they firmly believed that since their full mecha squad could hide from the eyes of the Federation, they would definitely bring a great surprise to the other party. They were very confident in their own strength. 3 black and green Moonwolf mechas suddenly shot out like arrows, separated from the main group, and rushed towards the black mecha on the outskirts of the valley. A series of rhythmic yet murderous imperial language rang out from within the Moonwolf mechas that swarmed out of the valley. Kill that little star. The Maple Forest Alliance's Moonwolf group, a full mecha configuration, had a total of 115 third-generation mechas of the Empire, and they were all mobilized tonight. These outstanding Imperial pilots quickly operated the mechas on their hands and did not reply to the command on the comm system. This was because when they heard that voice, they knew that if they could not kill the Federation national girl in the mecha in front of them today, the commander would definitely kill them all personally in anger. Luo Fu, the leader of the Night Wolf Mecha Brigade, a colonel of the Empire. He was one of the top 5 ace mecha pilots in the Imperial Expeditionary Force. Back then, he had the opportunity to enter the Emperor's Special Mecha Battalion, but in the end, he resolutely chose to follow the Expeditionary Force to a faraway land. It was because he firmly believed that he could only display his abilities on a real battlefield. Through the monitor screen, this Empire elite with a beard as long as wild grass stared coldly at the fleeing black mecha. Listening to the combat power evaluation sent back by the central control computer, he issued the order to attack. The heavy sound of the mecha running echoed through the quiet night sky. Countless mecha gushed out from the mouth of the valley like a stream of greenish-black molten lava. Vowing to bury the Federation mecha at the forefront, the central control computer had already given an early warning. But when the other party appeared before them, the Black MX mecha's SSC system and large semi-aperture radar finally confirmed the existence of the mecha horde. This fact made Su Lu feel a tinge of fear towards the camouflage ability of the Empire mecha. At this time, his communication with the command center had already been cut off. The reason he had refused the command center's order to retreat to the southwest was because he knew that once they deviated from the original plan, perhaps the safety of himself and Jian Shuier would be more guaranteed, but the main force lying in ambush ahead would not be able to achieve the results they had planned. Wish me good luck. He felt a slight numbness and itch from every inch of his skin. He took a deep breath, and the warm current in his body instantly spread to every part of his body. Then, through the simulation system that stuck close to his skin, it accurately magnified and transmitted to every part of the MX mecha. His narrowed eyes shone brightly, but his face was rather pale. This was the first time he had seen an Empire citizen up close, the first time he had met an Empire citizen on the battlefield, and this first meeting was a life-and-death battle. Jian Shuier gripped the metal pole beside her tightly, trying her best to get as far away from Su Lu as possible, afraid that she would interfere with his operation. Feeling the slight dizziness brought about by the instant acceleration of the mecha beneath her, she said seriously, "I am a jinx." This was not a joke. In such a tense moment of escape, the young girl was in no mood to joke. She was truly worried that her strange fate would bring misfortune to Su Lu. Su Lu smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. In the dim cockpit, the sunlight was enough to make one feel dizzy. He said, "I am a jinx." That said, he pushed the control stick once more. The MX mecha's twin engines roared to life, and with a deafening roar, The heavy mecha was like a monster. It crashed through a large tree in front of it and then fled into the distance. The mechanical arms of the Empire's Moon Wolf mecha opened fire. The originally quiet valley that only had the sound of drums was suddenly filled with countless screeching sounds. Mountain rocks shattered, clouds of smoke billowed, and high-speed rotating shrapnel shot towards the black mecha in front of them like raindrops. Lav had already received the orders from the Northern Hemisphere Command earlier, so he knew that there might be some kind of danger waiting for his mecha team ahead. However, he was not too worried. With 100 mechas gathered into a torrent, even an entire team of mechanics would not be able to stop him. What made him laugh coldly was that the strange-looking Federation mecha in front of him actually did not change its direction of escape. Could it be that the pilot wanted to use those heavy metal blocks of the Federation to compete with him in terms of speed? In the end, that black mecha was enveloped in a sea of fire and a rain of bullets. He operated the Empire's newest fourth-generation mecha and commanded hundreds of black and green mechas to chase after the enemy. He watched the scene on the screen coldly, waiting for the enemy's mecha to be destroyed and its people to be killed. Stupid bait, stupid trap. However, right after that, his eyes narrowed. This was because he clearly saw that the Black Federation mecha actually charged through the rain of bullets, and there was not a single trace of damage on the mecha's body. How did he do this? Lav stared fiercely at the black mecha that was getting faster and faster. From the dead silence of the communication system, he knew that the three mechas at the front and the subordinate mechas at the back were all shocked by the scene in front of them. Precise dodging within a small area. Who is this pilot? Lav's expression turned serious, and he controlled the mecha below him to instantly increase its speed. In an instant, it rushed out of the dense formation of mechas and rushed towards the black mecha at an extremely high speed. The mechas from the Imperial Moonwolf group were obviously shocked by the super dodging ability of the black mecha, but they did not slow down their speed, especially the three black and green mechas at the front. With the help of the auxiliary rocket engine, they suddenly shot forward and caught up to the back of the black MX. Looking at the Federation mecha that was just inches away from them, and thinking about how the pilot in this mecha was actually able to withstand the previous long-range attack without any damage, the three mechas simultaneously gave up on attacking with firepower and chose to engage in close combat instead. Decades of battlefield experience had already proven that in close combat, the Empire mechas that had the advantage of speed were more agile and had more destructive power, especially tonight when it was 3 against 1. The three black and green Moonwolf mechas stomped heavily on the soft ground, bringing along with them a large amount of black mud. Like three ferocious beasts, they charged forward in parallel, and the alloy blades on their mechanical arms shot out with a whoosh, ruthlessly stabbing towards the back of the black MX. All these actions were completed under the condition of absolute speed. Dodging the long-range attacks of mechas was not too difficult for the current Sulu. In reality, although the hundreds of mechas from the Empire were like a terrifying iron stream pouring out of the valley, his nervousness was still from his first experience on the battlefield and had nothing to do with cowardice. As the designer, he understood the performance of the Black MX-2 well, and because of this understanding, he had endless confidence. The Federation's newest generation of dual-engine mecha, appearing on the battlefield for the first time, the Empire soldiers who were caught off guard would definitely pay a heavy price. Following his quick operation, Lin Bian's Black MX mecha came to an abrupt halt. With a perfect twist of its body, it avoided the incoming alloy blade from its right. Then, with a seemingly casual but extremely precise punch, it struck out viciously into the cockpit of the Imperial mecha directly behind it. The heavy sound of metal hitting metal rang out, and it was abnormally unpleasant to the ears. Countless night birds in the forest, who were already suffering from insomnia due to the cannon fire in the distance, could no longer bear the heavy burden and flew into the sky, battered and exhausted. That ferocious Imperial mecha did not even have the slightest chance of defending itself against this simple close-range attack of the Black MX mecha. The cockpit of the mecha was miserably deformed, sparks flying everywhere as green smoke rose. Amidst the green smoke, the mecha fell powerlessly to its knees on the ground, accompanied by the unpleasant sound of components breaking apart. With one hit, the Black MX, in a posture that defied common sense, used its heavy mechanical legs to push off the ground and flew backwards. In midair, the huge body of the mecha actually forcefully turned around again. The Black MX landed on the ground with both feet, but it did not make any adjustments. It completely ignored the two Empire mechas on the side, and with a roar, it once again fled forward at a simple turn, a close-range attack, and it destroyed a Night Wolf 3rd generation mecha. Lav, who was rushing over at high speed, saw this unbelievable scene, and his face turned extremely pale. As an ace pilot, he quickly deduced that the reason for this shocking result was because the Empire mecha could not react at all in front of the Black mecha's high-speed movements. What kind of hand speed was required to execute such a high frequency of mecha movements? Lav did not believe that in this universe, there was anyone who could achieve such a hand speed, unless the pilot in the Black mecha was the pride of the Empire, the little princess, or the military god of the Federation. Although in the intelligence of the Empire military, there was a lieutenant colonel of the Federation at the Bermuda Mineral Star who seemed to be able to achieve such a level, he did not believe it at all. He only thought that it was a disguise made by the military to cover up their own incompetence. Lav's eyes were like a wolf's, and he stared fiercely at the Black mecha in front of him that was moving faster and faster. It was obvious that whether it was the pride of the Empire or the glory of the Federation, neither would appear on this planet at this time. So, there was only one explanation. The power output and instantaneous explosive speed of this Black Federation mecha had completely suppressed the 3rd generation mecha of the Empire. Could it be the rumored MX? Chapter 415. Listen up. Other than killing the little star, I want that mecha. Captain Lav's cold voice came out of the communication system of the Empire Mecha Group. This ace mecha pilot was shocked by the performance of the Federation mecha, but he quickly calmed down. After confirming that the mecha in front of him was the rumored new MX mecha developed by the Federation, he wasn't scared. Instead, he had a strong desire to capture that powerful mecha. He had more than 100 3rd-generation mechas from the Empire. More importantly, although the performance of the mecha was important, the piloting ability of the pilot was still the most important factor. The Northern Hemisphere Command had long warned him that the opponent might be a new MX mecha, but he had not paid much attention to it. It was only until that moment earlier, when he had witnessed the terrifying performance of that Black mecha in its simple and effortless manner, that he had truly thought of capturing the other for the Empire's research. Lav's piloting and hand speed had already surpassed level 4. Now he was standing on the threshold of level 5. He was very confident. The corners of his lips curled up in a cruel sneer, and the speed at which his hands operated suddenly increased. The speed of the new Gen 4 mecha which he had been suppressing all this time increased rapidly, turning into a cloud of dust that could devour people as it raced towards the front of the formation, the Black MX mecha in front, and the intimidating group of Empire mecha chasing behind didn't use long-range heat source weapons. They were chasing and escaping silently. The sound of the mecha running in the valley and in the wilderness was very clear. The entire night started to tremble. A chilling atmosphere was created. The black and green mecha of the Empire sprinted at high speed, kicking up countless streams of dust in their wake. It was an exceptionally spectacular sight. Meanwhile, that black mecha of the Federation, MX, was sprinting silently half a kilometer away. The current scene was like a group of grassland wolves that had smelled blood and suddenly discovered a lone lion. They were unwilling to give up, and they all wanted to rush forward and bite the lion fiercely once, twice, until the lion was torn into thousands of pieces of bloody flesh. In the midst of this pack of savage grassland wolves, there was a black-green mecha of a slightly different shape that appeared larger and more ferocious. Its speed was clearly much faster than the Imperial mecha beside it. In just a few breaths, it had already broken through from the midsection of the mecha pack to the very front. Using the SSC capture system, Sulu easily identified the unique Empire mecha in the field of vision of the helmet. According to the data provided by the Department of Defense, this should be the 4th generation mecha that the Empire had just successfully developed 7 years ago. The speed and piloting of the fourth-generation mecha made him squint his eyes. He felt a slight pressure. The person in the fourth-generation mecha was a master. Are you a little dizzy? Being chased by more than 100 Empire mechas, Su Li's simple and precise hand controls brushed past like the wind, not slowing down in the slightest. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and asked a completely unrelated question. The nation's maiden lowered her head weakly, her right hand covering her slightly exposed breasts. She wasn't worried that Su Lu would see anything, but she felt a little stuffy in her chest. Previously, the black MX mech suddenly swept backward, twisted its body, and threw a punch. These seemingly simple actions were all carried out at an extremely high speed. The pilot in the cockpit had to bear an extremely large load. Due to the gravitational pull, the load was even greater than that of the space fighter pilot. Su Li's body was like a well-polished machine. Naturally, there were no adverse reactions. However, Jian Shui, who sat beside him, suffered quite a bit. If she hadn't been tied tightly to the cockpit, she would probably have been seriously injured. Find something to do and distract yourself. That should be better. Su Lu looked at the Empire mecha moving faster and faster in his field of vision, as well as the cloud of mecha behind it. Although he knew that the opponent would not be able to catch up to him, he still felt some trepidation in his heart. In a slightly hoarse voice, he said, "Look at this red button. Later, when I tell you to press it hard." Jin Shui looked at the red button his right hand was pointing at and guessed that this must be some key control of the MX mecha. She raised her head to look at the man beside her and asked in surprise, "You want me to press it?" "I'm afraid you'll get airsick," explained Su Lu seriously. Jin Shui laughed bitterly. She really didn't know what this man's nerves were made of. In such a tense situation, he actually had the mood to joke around. Strength, determined attitude. The Black MX mecha had not entered overclocking mode, but it still maintained a high enough speed. Although the cloud of Imperial mecha behind, it was continuously closing the distance between them and the Black mecha with their light weight and high speed advantage. They were still more than 200 meters away. "Follow him. Don't use your jet acceleration for now. I really want to see where this mecha wants to lead us to." Luo Fu stared coldly at the Federation's mecha in front of him. He was alarmed. The Empire had always had the advantage in terms of speed in mecha battles. However, in tonight's pursuit, this advantage was almost gone. The fourth-generation mecha he was operating had already rushed to the front of the group, only about 100 meters away from the black mecha. However, he did not use any long-range attacks for the time being. The mecha horde ran madly, the earth trembling and dust filling the air, but they were still unable to catch up to that damned black mecha in front. In this spectacular, yet silent chase in the wilderness, apart from the stunning punch at the very beginning, not a single cannon or bullet was fired. It was just silence. However, who would have thought that the black MX in front of them was under so much pressure, and what kind of danger it was taking? Amidst the silence, the pressure, and the scent of danger, within the 200-meter distance that made Su Lu so relaxed and enraged the Imperial mecha horde so crazily, the black MX and the cloud of Imperial mecha behind it ran out of the plains, one in front and one behind. Away from the valley, past the forest, across the black plains, a mountain range could be vaguely seen at the end of the road. It was impossible to see the yellowish color of the mountain range in the darkness of the night, but through the precise positioning of the charter computer in his mind and the electronic map on board, Sulu easily determined that the line between Yellow Mountain Ridge and Lonely Mountain Ridge was just ahead. According to the Ministry of Defense's plan, the Federation's ambush force should be here. His eyes narrowed behind his helmet. With a light flick of his right hand, he reconnected with the Federation's command center. In a low voice, he said, "I have already entered the Yellow Mountain Ridge line. More than 100 third-generation Imperial mecha are 100 meters behind me. Please accept." In the Southern Hemisphere's Federal Army Command Center Hall, the officers who had become abnormally silent and oppressed due to the MX mecha's automatic disconnection instantly let out a collective sigh of relief when they heard this long-awaited voice. In reality, through the remnants of the glory of the Charter in the Southern Hemisphere, Hundreds of officers in the command center had been watching that spectacular escape on the ground. However, it was very difficult for them to grasp the specific situation around that black mecha. The Federation's third highest commander, General Nelson, frowned slightly and said, "Notify Commander Xiaoqing." Then he turned around and said calmly, "That Empire's satellite in the sky can be shot down now." The Empire had 3 autonomous orbit-changing satellites invading the southern hemisphere's space. Previously, the federal military had already shot down 2 of them, but they had purposely left one behind. The sinister intent behind this was very clear. The Federation Command Center did not want the Empire to chase after the bait only to lose it in the end. At this time, since the Black Mecha had already lured the Empire's ambush team into the encirclement, what was the point of leaving this orbit-changing satellite? General Nelson's expression was relaxed, but his heart was not. The Federation's third defense line was still enduring the crazy and bloody continuous attacks of the Empire's armored forces. Otherwise, he would not have watched the Moonwolf group break into the southern hemisphere without doing anything. Although they were luring the enemy in, the number of enemies they lured in seemed to be too many and too strong. Du Xiaoqing, I hope your Iron 7th Division can be as powerful on the battlefield as it was in the drill, General Nelson thought to himself as he looked at the electronic map on the large screen. In a situation where they could not receive follow-up support, an entire division of mechanics trying to ambush and eat the Empire's mecha team. This was not something a normal person could do. However, at this time, a sharp alarm sounded in the command center. A military staff officer reported loudly, with an extremely ugly expression, "The Empire's backup assault team has infiltrated to the 17th latitude of the south. They are currently following the path of the first wave of mecha teams and heading towards Luochio spaceport." Everyone in the command center was shocked. They all looked at General Nelson. General Nelson waved his hand to indicate that he understood. He seemed to have a well-thought-out plan, but in his heart, he started to feel uneasy. There were too many variables on the battlefield. The Federation took the initiative to lure the Empire's people to invade the South, but they did not expect that old general of the Empire to actually show a suicidal attitude and launch a direct attack by a large group that had never been seen before in the past 10 years. Under the crazy attacks of the Maple Forest Alliance, the Federation's defense line was in danger. The backup military force that was originally in the tactical simulation had no choice but to be deployed to the front line. At least for the next 2 hours, the command center would not be able to deploy any troops to support the front line. General Nelson's expression was serious. Moonwolf Group and Maple Forest Alliance's 18,000 soldiers. He no longer expected the Iron 7th Division to be able to destroy the enemy. He only hoped that Du Xiaoqing could hold on for a while longer. As long as the front line could catch a breather, the Westwood's 8th Army could move to the south, and victory would definitely belong to the Federation. But could the Iron 7th Division hold on for that long? The Empire's people seemed determined to win. Could that black MX mecha escape to Luochio? Standing between the rocks, Du Xiaoqing put down the night vision electronic binoculars in his hands and put on his sunglasses again. Even though it was late at night and there was no moon, there was no need for the Federation's command center to send a message. The Iron 7th Division, hidden on the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge, knew that the person they had been waiting for a long time had finally arrived. Smoke and dust had already risen from the flat field on the left side of the mountain range. In the night, a black MX mecha silently turned into a stream of light and passed through the difficult mountain path below the Iron 7th Division's ambush position. Not far behind him were the 10 mechas closest to the Empire's mecha group. "Get ready," Shiman Jin said to the electronics officer beside him in a low voice. Du Xiaoqing took off his sunglasses and coldly glanced at the Black Federation mecha that passed by at high speed. Then he glanced at the Empire's mecha group that seemed to be moving behind him and said, "Don't panic." Chapter 416. He put on and took off his sunglasses. While he was speaking, 10 Imperial Moon Wolf mechas roared past and chased after the escaping black MX mecha. Even though the Iron 7 Division ambushing in the mountains suddenly attacked, they could no longer help the black mecha. "There's a 4th-generation mecha," It should be the leader of the Moonwolf team, Lav. He's one of the top 5 ace pilots in the Imperial Expeditionary Force, Shimanjin whispered. Shimanjin reminded him in a low voice. He would definitely not question his teacher's command. However, seeing that the Federation's black mech was being chased into danger by the Empire's people, he was a little worried about the pilot and the national girl in the mech. Du Xiaoqing's expression was cold and stern as he stared at the Imperial mecha horde in the direction of the Lonely Ridge. He said indifferently, "This is a bag, and we are the rope that ties the bag. What are some small fries that slip through? What we want to eat is this entire mecha brigade behind us." If the Iron 7 Division had attacked just now, the Empire mecha horde that had suddenly slowed down for some reason would definitely know that there was an ambush here. If the mecha horde had decided to turn around and retreat with the high mobility of the Moon Wolf mechas, the Iron 7 Division would never have been able to catch up. They could only watch as the enemy turned into dust. As for Lav, the ace pilot of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, this iron-blooded teacher didn't care at all. "The Ministry of Defense asked us to ensure the safety of Jian Shuayer," Shimanjin said in a low voice. Du Xiaoqing lowered his eyes slightly and said, "The one driving the Black MX is Su Le. He won't die so easily." Shimanjin was shocked. He silently retreated to the back and nervously began to prepare for the Imperial Moonwolf group's arrival. However, what made him and the soldiers of the Iron 7 Division uneasy was that, for some reason, the Empire mecha horde outside of the ambush not only slowed down, but also showed signs of stopping. In the mountains, it was quiet. At this time, the latest battle situation from the Federation command reached Du Xiaoqing's ears. He was silent for a moment. Then he took a deep breath, raised his head, and looked at the horizon in the distance. Maple Forest Alliance's final trump card, that reserve assault brigade, had also come. Commander Du Xiaoqing had a complicated expression in his eyes. The bait plan of the Department of National Defense had lured in an army that was twice their size. However, the command center couldn't send any reinforcements. If Maple Forest Alliance's assault team and mechas were able to tear apart the bag and attack Luochio Airport, they would be able to threaten the side of the military supply depot. The Federal Army would be in absolute danger. General Umburi from the Northern Hemisphere was able to create such a situation out of the impossible. It could be said that he was a godly commander. Decades ago, on the same planet, in the same mountain range, the same Iron 7 Division, once, under almost exactly the same circumstances, they fought a bloody battle of life and death. That battle made the Iron 7 Division famous in the media. Except for the leaders of the federal military, no one knew that it was the fatal mistake made by the Iron 7 Division at the beginning of this bloody battle that led to the heavy losses of the federal military. It seemed that tonight on the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge, there would be another extremely tragic sniper battle. Du Xiaoqing quietly looked at the night sky and thought silently in his heart. Did his father stand in the same position as him? What was he thinking at that time? History seemed to be repeating itself, but the result would definitely not be the same. He coldly unbuttoned the collar of his trench coat and turned to face the officers of the division headquarters. He said calmly, "A brigade of 18,000 people is on its way here. I will only give you 1 hour. You must eat these 100 ugly Imperial mecha." Without air support, without a missile base, an entire division wanted to eat an entire Imperial mecha brigade, an entire mecha brigade with 100 third-generation Moonwolf mecha. Whether it was in the military academies teaching materials or in a real battle, this had never happened before because this was something that was impossible in the first place. However, after the senior officers of the Iron 7 Division heard their division commander's words, they only nodded firmly in silence. This was the first battle after the Iron 7 Division returned to the front line. They must win. Shimanjin stood behind her division commander, who was looking at the electronic map for the last time. Looking at her division commander's slightly trembling body, she suddenly felt a little sour in her heart. She said in a low voice, "The Imperial Mecha Group is obviously waiting for reinforcements from the brigade at the rear. What if they still refuse to come in after 10 minutes? Should we move forward with Operation Lightning?" "No need." Du Xiaoqing raised his head and took the hot towel from the orderly. He wiped his face in the darkness of the valley and said, "The Imperial soldiers are brave and impulsive. If we kill their leader, they will naturally go crazy." Shimin Jin was stunned. She thought that the commander of the Moonwolf group, Luo Fu, had already chased after Su Le. How could they kill him if they stayed in the mountains? Let the battlefield communication system scan a radius of 50 meters. I want to talk to that Black MX. Du Xiaoqing folded the towel and passed it to the orderly. You guys wait for the brigade at the back. Commander Luo Fu left the mecha group and led the 9 most outstanding third-generation mechas under his command to chase after Ling Lan. Before he chased after Ling Lan, he gave an important order to the entire mecha brigade through the communication system. The ambush at the front line of the Yellow Mountain was not the most important part of the war. However, it was the most important part. The headquarters of the Maple Forest Alliance in the Northern Hemisphere had long confirmed the possible locations of the Federation's ambush. They had even accurately calculated the ambush forces that the Federation could mobilize at this time by analyzing the takeoff and landing frequency and the garbage volume of the 2 major airports in the Southern Hemisphere in the recent months. It's just one division. A disdainful sneer appeared on Lav's face. He was sure that the Federation commander hiding in the mountains wouldn't dare to expose himself just because of these 10 mechas. Therefore, he bravely passed through the mountain path and chased after the Black MX. He said coldly to his subordinates through the communication system, "After I destroy that Black MX, I will come back and meet with you guys." Sula didn't know that the master in the Moonwolf 4th-generation mecha behind him was saying that he was going to destroy him with a confident and arrogant tone. At this time, the mountain path was ending and Luoqiao Airport was not far away. The escape with the nation's young lady was coming to an end. He was unusually calm and relaxed. However, that insensible old man told him that other than the mecha brigade at the back, the Empire had actually sent out the assault brigade, their trump card. In the military system of the Empire, a brigade was more powerful than a division of the Federation. The Federation headquarters didn't tell Su Le this information. In their opinion, Su Le was lucky enough to bring Jian Shuier safely to Luoqiao Airport. Plus, the ambush behind them had nothing to do with him. He didn't know which brigade was ambushing them at the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. However, from the old bastard's prediction, this brigade would definitely be in a terrible situation. At this moment, the military channel of the MX Mecha rang. Sulu was very familiar with the voice, but he didn't like it. "I'm Du Xiaoqing. I'm one of the 10 mechas chasing after you. The one in the 4th-generation mecha should be the brigade leader, Luo Fu." "Sulu, kill him." Su Li's eyes narrowed in shock. Only now did he know that the ambush was actually carried out by the Iron 7th Division. In the channel, that iron-faced commander's voice was as cold and direct as it was a few months ago. It sounded extremely rude, but he knew this person very well. This time, the other didn't use his military position to order him around. This was already very different. He only needed half a second to think. He narrowed his eyes, opened the universal channel, and said a single word. "Okay." In one of Master Schiller's plays, there was a mentally handicapped person who loved to run. That mentally handicapped person ran all over Planet S1, ran all over the Capital Ring, and in the end, even ran all the way to the West Woods. He even ran on a spaceship. This mentally handicapped person became a celebrity in human society. Countless people followed him, running nonstop, not asking for a reason, just running nonstop. However, one day, this mentally handicapped person suddenly didn't want to run anymore. He felt bored, so he stopped, and then turned around, saying that he wanted to go home, leaving his followers with endless emptiness and the disappointment of the media. Running was a habit. Once started, it was hard to stop. If one really stopped after running for a long time, it would always be hard to get used to. The mechas chased each other for an unknown amount of time tonight. Suddenly, the Black Federation mecha at the end of the mountain road ahead stopped abruptly, then slowly turned around. Out of the 10 Empire mechas, 9 of them stopped for a moment. The pilots in the cockpits couldn't believe what they were seeing. Because of the intense shock in their hearts, their operations were affected. Only that fourth-generation Moon Wolf mech, which had an exceptionally strong contrast between black and green, did not slow down in the slightest. Instead, the rocket jets at the back of the mech instantly shot out, the powerful propulsion causing its speed to become incomparably fast. Just this small detail was enough to prove that Captain Love of the fourth-generation mecha had the most determined mind and the most ruthless eyes of an ace mecha pilot. With a straight arrow of smoke, the fourth-generation Moon Wolf mecha charged towards the Black MX. At such a high speed, this mecha even used the mechanical arm on its right hand to draw a symbol in the air. Su Lu was a professional soldier, so he didn't have much understanding of the universal machine language. Thinking back to the time when he was in Yue University, when he had a mecha battle with that officer of the First Academy, it had caused quite a commotion. However, he could roughly understand what the Empire mecha pilot was trying to say. Thus, wearing the simulation system, he did not hesitate to give the mecha a middle finger. At the same time, in the dim cockpit, a slender index finger pressed hard on the red button amidst the hissing sounds of compressed air. A few heavy components of the Black MX body shot out one after another, smashing onto the ground. Surprisingly, the thick armor on the right shoulder did not fall off, and the middle finger of the right alloy hand stood straight up, facing the enemy. This MX was a special mecha that Shang Xiao had specially modified for Su Lu. Originally, it did not have the fire control system that most normal pilots would need, so the components fell off very quickly. In just 0.1 seconds, the Black Mecha had officially entered overclocking mode. At this time, the fourth-generation Moon Wolf Mecha had already arrived in front of the Black MX with an unstoppable momentum. The next moment, La's pupils suddenly shrank in the cockpit. This was because the Federation mecha in the vision of his helmet had disappeared. A strong sense of danger surged into his heart. Relying on his rich battle experience, Lav roared and forced himself to turn around in an instant. The black and green mech forcefully turned around at high speed, its thick mechanical arm blocking the front, just in time to block the silent punch from the night sky. With a low hum, the Black MX mecha's powerful twin engines were fully displayed in this one hit. The fourth-generation Moon Wolf mecha was forced to retreat. Then, the Black mecha forcefully increased its speed again. It turned into a flash of lightning and once again attacked the chest of the Black Moon Wolf mecha. The speed of the Black MX was too fast, and the frequency of its movements was too fast. It was like countless rocks falling from a mountaintop, striking the surface of the Moon Wolf mech's armor with crisp and powerful sounds, producing a continuous series of dull pa-pa-pa-pa-pa sounds. Lav's face was pale. He pushed his control to the limit. In this life-and-death situation, he had already performed beyond his usual standards. However, he still could not keep up with the Black mecha's movements. The Black MX dodged at high speed on the mountain path. There were no afterimages. It was just like a flash of lightning or a ghost. To Lav, it was more like a sharp and powerful bullet that he was terrified of. It kept shooting towards his face. Bullets could not turn, but this Black MX was able to move in a straight line at high speed. It was like a high-speed bullet that was bouncing back and forth in an alloy plate. What kind of hand speed was required to perform such a terrifying control? Or rather, what kind of freakish hand was required to perform such a control? Or rather, it was impossible to perform such a control by hand when the 9 third-generation Moon Wolf mechas of the Empire rushed to the battlefield. They were greeted by this shocking sight. They could only watch with their own eyes as the Moon Wolf mecha controlled by Commander Lav was continuously bombarded by the Black MX of the Federation, unable to retaliate at all. Under such immense shock, they were unable to react at all. According to the memories of a pilot who had survived the incident, he had never seen such mecha piloting in his entire life. He could not understand how a mecha weighing dozens of tons could perform such unimaginable maneuvers. The ground of the mountain path had clearly festered, but that Federation pilot had not been able to slow down the Black mecha's movements in the slightest. What had left the deepest impression on the surviving pilot was the close combat style of the Black MX mech. The strong mecha fighters all had their own close combat style. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng was bold and violent, Bai Yulan was sinister and silent, and Zhou Yu was serious and serious. As for the Black MX controlled by Su Lu, in this first battle, the style it displayed was simple and direct. It could even be described as plain. Su Lu understood the structure of mecha very well. Although the mecha designs of the Empire and the Federation were very different, the two sides of the universe had the same thinking habits. There was not much difference in terms of ideology. Therefore, every time he attacked, he would often attack the most inconspicuous part of the Black and Green Moon Wolf mecha. Only the mechanics would understand the key points of the mecha. It was extremely precise and precise. Simple, direct, plain, precise, and precise. When these 5 adjectives were stacked together, the style was mixed into a pile. When it was combined to the extreme, it became a silent ruthlessness, a silent suppression. In the 4th generation Moon Wolf mecha, Captain Love clearly felt the terror of this style. He was the ace pilot of the Empire. However, when he came here arrogantly, he was in despair. Although the Moon Wolf mecha was able to avoid 3 lightning strikes from the Black MX's tooth-edge alloy blade, his heart was getting colder and colder. He was getting more and more desperate. That dark and helpless danger was about to take over his mind, that a crisp sound rang out. The black light condensed into a single point. That was the Black MX that had stopped moving. The Black mecha pulled out a spinning alloy blade from the edge of the cockpit of the 4th generation Moon Wolf mecha. For any mecha, the front of the cockpit was definitely the strongest defense. However, the Black mecha continuously threw 7 or 8 heavy punches at that spot, followed by a final stab. No matter how strong the armor of the Empire mecha was, it was finally broken. Sparks shot out from the edge of the cockpit. However, the Black mecha still stubbornly did not fall. After entering overclocking mode, the Black MX's right shoulder fire control system, which was the only part that did not fall off, flipped out from under the armor. It aimed at the sparking cockpit of the 4th generation Moon Wolf mecha and blasted it. With a boom, the 4th generation Moon Wolf mecha fell to the ground. Immediately after, the Black MX lifted its heavy mechanical leg without hesitation and stomped on the already deformed cockpit of the Empire mecha. Green smoke billowed and blood flowed out 0.4 seconds. From the moment the two mecha came into contact to the end of everything, only 4 seconds had passed. The other 9 Empire mecha did not have the time to react, nor did they have the ability to participate in this terrifying mecha battle. They stared at the Black mecha that was turning around, and at the burning Moon Wolf mecha beneath its feet. They stood frozen on the mountain path in shock. In the dim cockpit of the Black MX mecha, Jin Shuang's eyes were tightly shut, her long eyelashes fluttering nonstop. Due to the high frequency of the mecha battle, the young girl's face was pale from the concussion. Her brain was in a daze, and she could not speak at all. However, she vaguely knew that she was still alive, while the Empire mecha was dead. Su Lu took off his helmet. Large amounts of sweat flowed down his forehead, following the smooth simulation system and flowing down to the water level of the cockpit. His face was pale, and a trace of complex emotions appeared in his slightly narrowed eyes. He did not immediately attack the 9 third-generation Empire mecha. This was because he was currently very weak, very tired, and even very hungry. Although the previous mecha battle had only taken 4 seconds, who knew how many controls he had done in those 4 seconds? Through the simulation system, the joystick, and the touchscreen, he had used 3 complex methods to control the Black MX. That was how he had gained the absolute advantage in front of the Empire Ace mecha pilot. However, after the battle, he had used up too much of his stamina and energy. Opening the universal channel, Su Lu wiped the sweat from his lips and beard. Panting, he spoke to the Iron 7th Division and Du Xiaoqing, who were ambushing him in the mountains. Already killed. Chapter 417. Kill him. I've already killed him. Du Xiaoqing held the mini-communicator and sent out orders to the Black MX mecha, which had already escaped from the valley. In less than half a minute, the Black MX mecha in the distance gave a clear and forceful response. These 2 simple sentences made the expressions of everyone in the Iron 7th Division on the peak change drastically. The officers knew very well that the person in the Moon Wolf 4th Gen mecha was the Empire's ace pilot Love. Facing such a strong opponent, Could it be that the Black MX only used such a short amount of time to end the mecha battle and kill the opponent? At this moment, the conversation between the commander and Su Lu still seemed to be echoing in the quiet peak, reverberating in their ears. Everything happened so quickly that the officers couldn't react in time. They looked at the commander in the command center in shock as he turned on the high-powered battlefield communicator. Shimin Jin had been carefully monitoring the Empire's mecha group outside the valley. The relevant tactical simulations had already been completed. All the combat units under the command of the division knew the tactical details of this ambush by heart. He shouldn't be so nervous, but this was the first time the Iron 7th Division was on the battlefield. A real battlefield was very different from a mock battle. Furthermore, the backup assault team of the Imperial Expeditionary Force had more than 10,000 people, and they were already on their way. There wasn't much time left for the Iron 7 Masters. Fortunately, the Black MX was able to kill the Imperial Mecha Captain cleanly behind the mountain with a few simple words. Compared to his colleagues, he woke up faster. This was because he had seen how terrifying the MX under the control of Su Lu was when he was at the bottom of the Blue Pond Valley on planet S1. Looking at the back of her teacher, Shimin Jin's heart surged with a trace of complicated emotions. This kind of emotion was not because Su Lu had killed the Empire's ace mech pilot in seconds, but because of the extremely concise conversation between her teacher and Su Lu. From the commander to the most common soldier in the Iron 7th Division, no one liked the young lieutenant colonel who had joined the army halfway. Su Lu believed that he didn't have a good impression of the Iron 7th Division either. However, Du Xiaoqing did not even give it a second thought before handing over the crucial task of luring the Empire's mecha fleet into the valley to the other party. Su Lu didn't even think about it before agreeing to it, and completing it in an extremely efficient manner. What did this mean? This represented absolute trust and confidence. Division Commander Xiaoqing had absolute confidence in Su Li's abilities, and Su Lu also had absolute confidence in Du Xiaoqing's military judgment. Furthermore, he believed that a model soldier like Du Xiaoqing would never harm his comrades on the battlefield. That was why he did not hesitate to turn around and take a huge risk to kill a person for the Iron 7th Division. This kind of trust did not happen between brothers who had gone through life and death together. It happened between two people who were natural opposites and had a deep hatred for each other. The meaning behind this was very moving. Du Xiaoqing did not care about what his subordinates were thinking. He waved his hand with a cold expression on his face and signaled the troops to start preparing. Then he connected to the battlefield high-power communication system and said into the sound receiver, "Lav is dead." He spoke the Empire language, a very standard Empire language. Since a long time ago, the entire Iron 7th Division had started training in this area because they knew that one day they would have to go to the front line and deal with the Empire people face to face. In the division headquarters, Du Xiaoqing's voice was calm and deep. However, in the next moment, a loud voice suddenly rang out from the countless mountains and valleys along the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. "Lav is dead." The Federation's battlefield communication system transmitted this sentence through the high-power loudspeaker. The loud voice resounded through the mountains and shattered the quiet night sky of the southern hemisphere. It was clearly transmitted to the Imperial Moonwolf group that was on alert and waiting for reinforcements at the edge of the valley. Almost at the same time, in the dark valley, following Du Xiaoqing's cold voice, countless bright light beams lit up. In the crevices of the mountains and in the rock formations, the high-brightness searchlights that the Iron 7th Division had set up in advance instantly lit up the entire sky and the valley. The dark yellow rock surface of the mountain finally showed its true color under the bright light. The Imperial Moonwolf group outside the valley was illuminated by the bright light and couldn't hide. On the gentle slope of the valley, the Federal military's mountain grenade launchers also took off their disguise. Countless composite armored vehicles and armed infantry of the Federation revealed themselves and aimed at the hundreds of third-generation Moonwolf mechas from the Empire. The airstrike force of the Empire and the Federation was on the third line of defense in the Southern Hemisphere right now. They were chasing each other at high speed like streams of light, providing support for the extremely cruel offensive and defensive bloody battle on the ground. There was no way for them to provide support. Therefore, the Iron 7th Division actually gave up on the usual flares and chose to use searchlights to illuminate the sky and the ground at the same time. The iron-blooded commander of the Iron 7th Division gave up on the ambush at the last moment of the battle without hesitation. He chose to annihilate the enemy head-on. It was just a matter of whether the Empire people dared to come. Because of the searchlights, this valley became a bright concert stage, just like the concert called Victory a few hours ago. There was no countdown, no yelling orders, only silence. The bright searchlights lit up countless mountain peaks. Countless armored vehicles and soldiers of the Federation appeared in the valley. Then, countless cannons roared and fired at the Empire mechas outside the valley. The lights were very bright, but it wasn't unbearable. The appearance of the Federation's ambush in the valley ahead was already within the Empire's tactical calculations. Therefore, even though the Empire soldiers saw the dense crowd of armored vehicles and soldiers of the Federation charging over, they were still able to maintain their calm. Even under the whistling and sharp barrage of cannons, they were confident that their high-speed mechas would be able to avoid most of the damage. What really made the Empire soldiers shiver was the voice at the beginning, that sentence. They didn't know that the person who spoke was the commander of the Federation's Iron 7th Division, Du Xiaoqing, but because of the content of that sentence, they felt extremely cold. Is the commander dead? Colonel Lav's domineering and rough voice didn't ring in the communication system of the Empire mechas. All the Empire officers, including the 3 squadron leaders, felt an extremely dangerous omen in their hearts. They knew that the Federation wasn't lying. At this time, the first wave of cannons from the Iron 7th Division had already arrived. Scatter and evade. The first squadron leader of the Moonwolf group ordered in a deep voice. 104 green-black Moonwolf mecha, with a whoosh, followed the forest outside the valley and began to perform high-speed evasive maneuvers. Even though they were shocked to the point of disbelief by the extremely terrifying news, these Empire pilots still calmly and precisely completed each of their maneuvers, dispersing with extreme speed towards the wild forest behind the valley. The movements of the Empire's mechas were so clean and precise. It felt like a balloon filled with many glass beads that suddenly exploded. All the glass beads inside the balloons sputtered everywhere. Every mecha maintained an extremely suitable distance from each other. Boom! 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 The dense cannons of the Iron 7th Division landed horribly on the ground. The bombardment caused the entire ground to tremble. Tons of soil were blown up and scattered. Trees were burned and fell. Giant rocks were shattered. However, the Empire's mechas used their high mobility to avoid most of the direct damage. The mechas in black and green quickly left the dense cannons and hid behind the mountains and giant trees. Using these natural shelters, they blocked the first wave of cannons from the Federation. Right now, there were 2 paths in front of the Moonwolf group. The first was to give up on the 10 mechas that had already rushed past the valley, including their commander Lav. They would immediately retreat and leave the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge area. As long as the mechas increased their speed, the Federation's ambush team wouldn't be able to catch up with them. The second path was to attack the valley and weaken the Federal Army's combat power at all costs. They would avenge their commander and delay the Federal Army for the Empire's assault team. In fact, an entire mecha team did have this ability. Although the valley area was convenient for ambushes, once the mechas broke in, their high mobility would be the nightmare of the Federation's mechanical army. Commander, 17 mechas are slightly damaged. Only 2 mechas have lost their mobility. The smoke and flames that filled the sky outside the valley, as well as the violent explosions there, had become much quieter by the time they reached the peak. However, Shimin Jin's voice was still very loud. Got it. Du Xiaoqing had a cold expression on his face. He silently looked at the trembling ground under his feet. He looked at his subordinates who were bravely charging in the mountains. He was very satisfied with this terrible result. Iron 7th Division's first round of cannon fire didn't cause any real damage to the Empire's high-speed mechas. On the contrary, it gave the Empire's soldiers a strong sense of confidence. According to the calculation of firepower, There was indeed only one Federation mechanic in the mountains. How could a division be able to stop their Iron Stream charge? Between the two completely opposite paths, the Moonwolf group chose the latter without hesitation. The shock and pain caused by Commander Lav's death turned into courage and bravery. 100 black and green mechas instantly broke through the thick fog of gunpowder and charged into the valley. The Iron Stream charge rushed in, stirring up a frenzied cloud of dust. The collective charge of the heavy mechas looked so unstoppable that even the mountains under the searchlights started to tremble. High mobility, powerful firepower, and a mecha design that was extremely suitable for mountainous warfare turned the Moonwolf group into a ferocious mountain-splitting axe. They viciously chopped down on the encirclement of Iron's 7th Division. Countless dull sounds of metal clashing rang out in the valley. The sound of bullets and cannons shook the sky. The Empire's mechas were like countless black shadows, moving freely in the front line of Iron's 7th Division. They were ferocious and incomparably sharp. In an instant, they continuously charged forward a distance of 700 meters. In front of this kind of Iron Stream charge, the slow tanks and armed infantry couldn't react at all. In the process of charging forward, the Moonwolf group's advantage in speed was displayed to the extreme. Find their M52S, closely monitor the activation frequency of the anti-mecha mine array. The company leader's Moonwolf mecha fiercely shot out a rain of bullets, turning the Federation soldiers 100 meters away into pools of blood. At this time, there were countless flames of anger in his heart. He only wanted to help the main team behind him delay this Federation division, but he didn't let down his guard that the headquarters of Iron's 7th Division. Shimin Jin's expression was solemn as she looked at the rising casualty count. Finally, she couldn't help but look at her division commander. Du Xiaoqing wore sunglasses and sat silently on a large rock. He looked at the tragic battlefield below, looking at the fierce yet cautious Empire's mechas breaking into the ambush circle. He knew that the enemy's backup commander hadn't truly gone crazy. He opened his mouth and said, "Wait a little longer." Shimin Jin's heart tightened. It should be known that every second they waited, more of their comrades would die. What my division commander needs now is time. He must succeed in one strike. We can't let this pile of mechas drag on until the 10,000 people behind us arrive. Du Xiaoqing slowly closed his eyes under the sunglasses and said, "Only victory and defeat, not life and death. This is war." Chapter 418. The tongues of flame that shot out from the front of the mechanical arms of the black and green mecha were actually high-speed and sharp bullets. They hit the cliffs of the valley and splashed out countless fragments. 3 Federation soldiers hiding behind the hidden fortifications were hit and fell to the ground. In just a moment, the 3 fresh corpses were turned into cloth bags filled with bright red material. Tongues of flame sprayed out everywhere. Countless amounts of soil were flipped up, and the tanks were set ablaze. Amidst the continuous and terrifying sounds of machine guns, the sturdy base at the bottom of the mountain was riddled with holes. Blood and broken limbs flew everywhere. The most terrifying thing was the mobility of these black and green mecha. Under the crazy barrage of the Federation's mountain howitzers, most of them still managed to survive. The Empire's mecha group was like a pack of tireless grassland wolves. They cruelly and crazily rushed into the ambush area of the Iron 7th Division. They bared their sharp fangs and bit viciously at the Federation's base. Then, using the fastest speed possible, they changed their formation and broke into smaller groups. Taking advantage of the occasional collapse of the Iron 7th Division's front line, they split into a dozen small groups and spread out in all directions. Following the natural water line and gentle slope of the valley, they launched a second charge. Screeching sounds rang out. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division, hidden in the mountains, had been silently and resolutely counterattacking. The bullets fired by the Federation's 21-26 sniper rifle hit several Empire mecha. However, they only left light gray marks and dense dents on the sturdy alloy armor. One of the Imperial mechs raised its right arm and fired its main cannon at a 32-degree angle. Along with a heavy roar, The powerful cannon fire didn't hit the target. Instead, it hit the quick-solidifying concrete structure of the fortification. The explosion caused the quick-solidifying concrete to shatter and splatter in all directions. Of the 5 Federation soldiers hiding in the fortification, 4 were instantly crushed to death by the rocks. Blood flowed out along the remnants of the explosion and the cracks between the rocks. There was still one soldier who did not die immediately. The helmet he was wearing blocked most of the high-speed rocks, but his goggles had been shattered. He screamed in pain, and his face was covered in blood and exposed muscles. In the last moment of his life, he raised the MP5 submachine gun in his hand and fired nonstop at the foot of the mountain. Both of his eyes were blinded, and blood was flowing down his face. The submachine gun in his hands was shooting out flames, but it was aimless. He couldn't hit the black-green mecha in front of him at all. The next moment, he missed a step and fell down the cliff. The Empire's black and green mecha coldly watched this scene. Without any hesitation, it continued to charge forward along the gentle slope. But from the side, a ponytail-heavy rocket fired over with a whoosh, accurately hitting the side of the mecha's abdomen. After the loud explosion, there was a dull sound of metal parts rubbing against each other. The outer armor of the Empire's mecha's engine was severely damaged, and its power output was occasionally affected. Its originally high-speed movement mode was suddenly slowed down. It was only delayed for a moment, and 7 or 8 precision-guided rockets from the Federation flew at high speed from all directions at the same time, hitting the heavy and huge body of the mecha. The sound of the explosion and the blinding light kept flashing. This Empire's mecha was burned black, and its parts were severely damaged. Its balance was completely disabled, and it fell down the cliff in a tragic manner, turning into a pile of alloy garbage. Just like that Federation soldier just now, such a tragic scene of a battlefield appeared below the Yellow Mountain Ridge, below the Lonely Mountain Ridge. The wolf pack of the Empire's mecha brigade spread out at high speed. Wherever they charged, battle would break out there. Tragic scenes could be found everywhere. Every Federation soldier who had died in the mountains actually had a life story that belonged to them. However, at this moment, there was no extra time to reflect on it, to sigh with emotion, because this was a battlefield. This was war. Today's ambush was the first time the Iron 7 Division had been on the battlefield. Facing the ruthless and crazed mecha of the Empire, feeling the explosions of fireworks in the valley, hearing the familiar cries of pain around them, and seeing the shattered and burning corpses of their comrades lying between the rocks and cliffs, they finally understood that the battlefield was not a drill. Their dead comrades wouldn't be able to stand in front of them again just by removing the death indicator on their bodies like before. Under the high-speed charge of the Empire's mecha, the first line of the Iron 7th Division's ambush was showing signs of chaos and even being defeated. No matter how strict Du Shaoqing's management was, and how calm his command was, after all, an army was made up of people, not real machines. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division were as firm and unyielding as their commander, Shaoqing. However, their fingers would get tired when they used the armor-piercing heavy machine guns. They would tremble, they would cry, they would laugh, and they would feel pain. And now, they were even a little confused and scared. But they were the Iron 7th Division after all. The Iron 7th Division, the trump card of the Federation, had never lost in military exercises for 10 years. After 10 years, they had returned to the West Woods, to the front line, to the 5460. How could they be defeated by fear? With their pride, their perseverance, how could they allow themselves to be defeated? The soldiers of the 3rd Regiment of the Iron 7th Division, who were in charge of the first line of ambush, finally exploded at the most critical moment. They stood up from the cliff, wiped the ash off their faces, endured the pain from their wounds, and ignored the high-speed Empire's mecha charging towards them. Using the corpses of their comrades who had died under the Empire's alloy blades as motivation, they roared and launched their counterattack. The bravery of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division wasn't enough to change the situation on the battlefield. An Imperial mech squad originally had the ability to fight head-on with an entire Federation division. Plus, this was an ambush battle in the middle of a mountain range. The high mobility of the Imperial mech squad gave them a natural advantage. In fact, if the Federation's Ministry of Defense didn't misjudge the type of Imperial armies that were attacking them, then the Iron 7th Division's choice of location for the ambush would definitely have a deeper meaning. The fierce battle quickly spread out from the entrance of the mountain valley in all directions. In order to avoid the coverage of the Federation's mountain grenades, the Empire's mecha squad had to spread out in all directions. They also had the ability to complete this kind of spread-out battle. Looking at the red smoke under Silent Hill in the distance, Shimin-Jean put down her electronic binoculars. Her mood was very bad. One of the Empire's mecha squad had already rushed past the anti-mecha mine formation. Although the turbulent explosion had a good effect, it didn't cause any fatal damage to the enemy. Plus, with the high speed of the Empire's mecha, the Federation's rocket launchers didn't have much of an effect. If the Ministry of Defense could distribute ACWs, the 3rd Division wouldn't have to fight so hard. The Federal Army's normal anti-material sniper rifle couldn't cause fatal damage to the 3rd-generation mecha of the Empire, unless the ACWs were paired with high-rotation, speed, tungsten alloy armor-piercing bullets. However, that legendary big gun was too expensive to make. Even if the Ministry of Defense's General Assembly base wanted to, the Budget Committee of Parliament Hill couldn't approve it. The division headquarters was dead silent. The officers were working hard in front of their workstations. No one dared to look at the division commander sitting at the back. Faced with the ferocious attacks of the Empire's mecha fleet, the Iron 7 Division had only sent out 1 regiment so far. Even the amount of ammunition they had was limited to 1/3 of the original limit. No one knew what the division commander was thinking. Du Xiaoqing sat silently in his chair. His hands, which were wearing lambskin gloves, rested on his knees. No one seemed to have expected that the youngest Major General of the Federation, who was highly valued by the President and the military, was also stepping onto a real battlefield for the first time. In the eyes of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division, Division Commander Xiaoqing was like a god. There was no way he would make a mistake. So, at this moment, no one noticed that the veins at the corner of his eyes were popping under his sunglasses. The federal military's plan on this planet was to cast a net. They would use Jian Shui'er as bait to lure the Empire's people to the south. Then, they would use the West Woods Army on the dividing line between the north and the south to pull the net north. They would trap the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maple Forest Alliance. Then, they would use the Iron 7th Division to tie the last rope. But old General Ambly of the Empire obviously didn't see through this was a trap. He didn't know why, but from the very beginning, he launched a fierce attack on the dividing line between the north and south, tearing the Federation's net into pieces. In this way, the rope that was the Iron 7th Division had to face the surprise attack of the Imperial Mech Squad and the Assault Brigade. It should be known that the combat power of a mech squad was already terrifying. Not to mention, the size of the Imperial Assault Group was even bigger than a division of the Federation. The rope became the bottom of the net without any cloth covering it. The mission of the Iron 7th Division was extremely difficult. Westgate, more than half of the Empire's mechas on this planet are under our watch. It's already very good that the Iron 3rd Division is doing so well. Du Xiaoqing calmed down. Because of the current situation, he had to take down all 100 Empire's mechas in the shortest amount of time and at the lowest cost. No, now there were only 86 mechas left. Only then would the Iron 7th Division be able to deal with the Imperial Assault Group that was about to arrive. That was why the Iron 7th Division had been suppressing most of their firepower since the start of the battle. They had to lure the crazy Empire's mechas into the depths of the battlefield and make it impossible for them to escape. However, the Iron 7th Division had to pay the smallest price, while the soldiers on the front line had to pay the heaviest price. Waveban appeared. Waveban appeared. The electronic alarm of the Empire's mechas rang out in the internal communication network of the Empire's mechas. Boom! 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 The Federation's anti-mecha lightning arrays buried in the mountains all exploded. The earth trembled as a result, and the valleys turned yellow as a result. Magnificent smoke and streams of light continued to linger in the night sky that seemed to be burning red. The Empire's mechas that had already scattered into formation scattered once again. Like countless balloons that had been blown apart, they became even smaller balloons. The leader of the first company of the Moonwolf group looked at the magnificent explosion behind him through his vision. After confirming that there were still around 80 mechas that were fine, his confidence increased again. However, he was still a little worried about his leader's life. Leader Love was a hero of his generation. He wanted to capture the Federation's MX mecha alive, but he was killed by the MX mecha. Could it be that the Federation's new MX mecha were really that terrifying? Fortunately, the Federation didn't have the ability to mass-produce them yet. Just as the company leader was thinking this, his pupils suddenly shrank. Chapter 419. This was a battlefield. This was a war. This was not a stage play. This was not a deliberate climax. This was a sudden effect deliberately planned by Du Xiaoqing. It was like a flash of lightning changing the shape of the sky, like a fire igniting the screen of a cinema, suddenly appearing, shocking the mecha of the Empire. They couldn't help but tremble. They suddenly felt the shadow of death. They didn't want to die, but they suddenly felt the shadow of death. The black and green mechas scattered across the wide mountainous area. The Empire's mechas that once showed their powerful mobility in the first wave of attack, showing off their ferocity and ruthlessness. At the foot of the Yellow Mountain Ridge, at the foot of the lonely mountain ridge, under the huge yellow rock, under the burning debris, all of them froze on the spot like their platoon leader, because they all realized that there was one or more black mechas in front of them. The Black Federation mecha didn't look very strong, but as the people of the Empire always said, judging a book by its cover was the road to death. A slender body didn't mean that it was delicate, not to mention that these mechas looked so familiar. Just like 2 hours ago, they kept running under their eyes, but they could never catch up with that mecha. MX, Federation's MX. A single mecha was a terrifying killing machine, and a group of 100 mechas was an alloy flow that was hard to resist. Even an entire mechanic would find it hard to resist their high-speed, agile, and ruthless battle style. What was this terrifying group of Empire's mechas afraid of? Cannon formation? There wouldn't be any in the mountainous area. High-speed missile launch? The missile bases of both sides were firing with all their might, but those missiles that were rampaging in the night sky were miserably flying back and forth in the air above the dividing line between the north and the south. Fighter jets attacking the ground? The Federation's fighter jets were fighting with the Empire's Night Wolf fleet at Zaiqiu Airport, and they also had to closely guard the sky above Luoqiu Airport. At the front line between the Yellow Mountain Ridge and the Lonely Mountain Ridge, at this moment in the middle of the night, what was the Imperial mech squad afraid of? In fact, the platoon leader knew very well that the enemy of the military mechas could only be the military mechas. At this moment, unless the Federation sent out a group of M-Series Federation mecha to deal with him, the Empire's mecha squad would obtain the final victory. But how could a mere Federation mecha operator have so many M52 mechas? It should be known that in that society that was all about bullshit elections, there was no such thing as a full mecha operator. The platoon leader's thoughts stopped there, the Federation mecha operators in the valley, but these black mechas that appeared between the mountains and the giant rocks. What were they? A black light flashed, and 3 black mechas from the Federation mechas flew across the sky and rushed downwards. The first of the Federation of mechas, the Empire, and the first of the Federation, and then collapsed under the 3 continuous 3 attacks amidst the deafening boom. The Empire's dark green mecha tumbled down the mountain like a piece of metal before exploding abruptly. Everyone was stunned. This was mainly referring to the pilots of the Empire's Moonwolf mecha team. They had already confirmed the death of Captain Love. However, right after that, they stared in shock at the captain of the first squadron. Like a rubber ball, he was kicked down the hill by the Federation's mecha and turned into a ball of fire with a chilling aura. MX. Be careful. It's the Federation's MX. In the internal communication system of the Empire mecha squad, sharp, angry, and desperate screams rang out. They were not afraid of ambushes, nor were they afraid of the Federation's Iron 7th Division's so-called tactics. but suddenly faced with a new Federation mecha that completely overwhelmed them. Finally, they felt fear. Not all of the Empire mecha were like their poor captain, facing 3 Black Federation mecha MX alone. The more common situation was when a Black mecha stood up silently in front of 3 or 4 Empire Moonwolf MX third-generation mechas. The Federation mecha tore off its yellow cloth disguise and stood up silently and coldly. It suddenly appeared, but it was as if it was a stream from the north of this planet. From the peak of the mountain, between the rocks, and below the valley, it charged at high speed and viciously pierced into the Empire mecha squad that had already scattered into countless small teams. More than 20 black mecha shadows suddenly burst out and spread out in all directions. The heavy mecha's rapid footsteps made the rocks in the valley fly up into the air. The sound of cannons, alloy knives cutting through the air, and explosions rang out one after another in this battle zone that was dozens of kilometers in radius. Flames, gunfire, and main cannons continuously lit up the entire sky and countless remote corners. The most common scene on the battlefield was a Black Federation mecha MX charging into the small team formation of 3 Empire Moonwolf MX third-generation mechas, as if it didn't care about its own life. In just a short few seconds, more than 10 mechas were destroyed, and flames rose into the sky. All of the Moonwolf Group's pilots could see that these Federation mecha MX that had been in hiding for a long time were obviously not as strong as the Black MX from before. However, no matter if it was instantaneous speed, fire control system, or everything else, the Black MX that the Federation had hidden in ambush was ahead of their own mecha in every aspect, and it was hard for their own mecha to retaliate. Even if it was 1 against 3, or even 1 against 4, it was still the same. Iron 7th Division's long-awaited lightning-fast attack began with the lightning strikes of the 20 Black MX mechas. Loud explosions rang out in the vast valley from time to time, and clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. No one knew how many Empire mechas had tragically exploded in this short period of time. The low humming sound of engines rang out again under the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. Countless composite armors and strong firepower troops swarmed out of the seemingly empty fortifications and valley like a swarm of ants. Like flowing water, they spread out and rushed in all directions along the valley's terrain. All of the Iron 7th Division's regiments and all of the long-range firepower troops poured out in torrents, and their momentum shook the heavens. The strongest firepower unit of the Iron 7 Division, which had been in hiding until now, didn't participate in the mecha battle at the center of the battlefield. The soldiers drove the war chariots, leading the concentrated firepower base, and drove out of the valley with stern expressions. The mecha battle at the center of the battlefield was already in full swing. More than 20 Federation MX mecha were entangled with an entire mecha clan of the Empire like scattered bubbles, sharing life and death with each other, loving each other, unable to be separated. Iron 7th Division's firepower formation that hadn't been activated all this time couldn't carry out any long-range attacks at all. In the high-speed mecha battle that looked like streams of light, any coverage from the firepower would hurt their own MX mechas. In reality, Iron 7th Division didn't have the intention to carry out any long-range attacks at all. Countless mechanical troops passed by the burnt fortifications, past the corpses of their comrades, and silently walked into the distance. Nearly 10,000 Federation soldiers and the most advanced tanks used the shortest amount of time to seal off the valley around the battlefield. The majestic Iron 7th Division didn't care about the intense mecha battle at the center of the valley at all. They began to change their formation, accompanied by the low and frightening rumbling sounds of engines. One regiment even left the battlefield and entered the edge of the wild forest outside the valley in the northwest direction. 4 regiments silently took up their respective positions and aimed all of their firepower control equipment at the night, at the Imperial assault group that was about to arrive. 4 mecha divisions drove away from their positions at high speed and followed the military path at the bottom of the valley to seal off the 4 exits of the valley battlefield. They began to quickly and nervously set up a pomegranate cannon formation. Looking at the deployment of these troops, It seemed like they wanted to seal off all of the exits of this mountainous battlefield. The Mecha Division soldiers in the northwest direction, who were responsible for using their own lives and cannon fire to seal off the exits, didn't even have time to complete their orders before they saw 7 heavily damaged Empire Moonwolf 3rd generation mechas turn into streams of light and fly past their positions. Battalion Commander. All of the Federation soldiers thought that they had made an unforgivable mistake, but they immediately relaxed. This was because a Black Federation MX mecha was chasing closely behind the 7 damaged Empire mecha, whistling through the air as it chased after them. Forcefully seal off all signals for 3 minutes. Don't worry about your own command system. I want the Empire people to not make a single sound in these 3 minutes. I don't need any command right now. The troops at all levels will do as they see fit. Fight however you want. On a lonely mountain peak, the lonely Du Shaoqing stood in front of the electronic map. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, he bowed slightly and said indifferently, "I only want you to destroy all of these Empire mechas within 3 minutes." Yes, Commander. The MX mecha had completely suppressed the Empire mecha group at this time. Iron 7 Division's electronic troops had already begun their overflow attacks. Although the Empire's communications were completely blocked, Iron 7 Division's own battlefield commands were also completely ineffective. The officers couldn't understand this kind of military order, but they definitely accepted it. This was because they firmly believed that any order from Commander Shaoqing had its own deeper meaning. When the Ministry of Defense drafted the plan for tonight, the Federation only had 230 MXs. Our Iron 7 Division, a division, took 1/10 of that. This is the absolute trust the President and the Ministry of Defense have in my division. Du Shaoqing slowly straightened his body. Looking at the Black Federation MX mecha on the screen, he said, "I never doubted that we would win this battle, but this victory is not enough." After saying this most outstanding young man of the Federation took off the sunglasses on his nose and rubbed the space between his eyebrows, looking slightly tired. Luring the Empire mecha group deep in, using horizontal fire and anti-mecha minefields to force the Empire mecha group to scatter, then sending the MX mecha out. 1 against 3. Everything that happened on the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge battlefield was all within his calculations. If he had used the MX mecha group attack from the start, or if he had thrown in all of Iron 7 Division's forces, the Imperial Moonwolf group would have been utterly defeated, but there was always the possibility that a few mecha would have escaped. And he, Du Shaoqing, didn't want any of these Empire mecha to survive and spread a single word. "I have the MX, the stubborn enemy is helpless." However, not only did he want to take down this mecha brigade, he also wanted to give the Imperial assault group behind them a surprise. Outnumbered, and in this dangerous moment on the battlefield, he still had such ambition, such determination, and such fighting spirit. Other than the Iron 7 Division, other than this cold-faced Commander Shaoqing, who else could it be? Chapter 420. At this moment, in the lonely mountains of the Yellow Mountain Ridge, more than 20 black mechas with a hint of elegance, but they were still heavy enough to crush the rock surface. They were jumping up and down, flames spurting out of their arms as they dodged and dodged at high speed, defeating the black and cyan mechas of the Empire one after another. A few months ago, the Shell Motor Company and the Ministry of National Defense had jointly produced more than 200 MX mecha. Naturally, there were more now, but they still needed to go through a series of pre-battle tests and adjustments. Right now, there were less than 100 mecha that could actually be used in battle. On Planet 5460, the Federation had invested 50 of them, and the Iron 7th Division had taken half of them. The standard MX mecha had only been officially set last year, and in just one short year, it had already been officially distributed to the frontline troops. This was the federal military's biggest secret and source of confidence. The Ministry of National Defense dared to set up such a situation for the Imperial Expeditionary Force on this border planet. Even though the early stages of the battle had been so tragic, the frontline command had still forcefully endured it, ignoring the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge for the sake of the bigger picture. It was also because of this The Empire's mecha group had already been led into the center of the battlefield by the brave soldiers of the Iron 7th Division's 3rd Regiment. Faced with the sudden appearance of more than 20 high-performance MX mecha, the Empire's mecha group was on the verge of collapse. The secret of the MX mecha had been hidden until now, and finally achieved perfect results. However, Du Xiaoqing still wanted to hide this secret for a while longer, all the way until the Imperial Expeditionary Forces Assault Brigade arrived. Any secret was like old wine. The longer it was hidden, the stronger the aroma of the wine, the more intoxicating it was, and the more it could kill. This intoxicating old wine could probably only make the Empire's people drunk tonight. Since that was the case, Du Xiaoqing naturally wanted to drink to his heart's content. Du Xiaoqing looked at the battle situation displayed on the screen. He looked at the 3rd-generation mecha of the Empire that were retreating bit by bit, and looked at the troops that had already firmly held all the checkpoints. He confirmed that victory was already decided, but the solemn expression on his face did not disappear at all. He used his index finger and thumb to rub the space between his eyebrows until it was bright red. He lowered his head and said, "Use the reserve team to replace the 3rd group." After being startled for a moment, Shiman Jin quickly nodded and used the fastest speed to pass down the order of the teacher. From the very beginning, this sniping battle in the mountainous region had become a proper battle for the Imperial Mech Squad. There was nothing strange about it, and there was no element of surprise. Iron 7th Division couldn't possibly surround the high-speed mecha swarm, but they also had to annihilate the enemy in this yellow mountain range. They had no choice but to resort to such a desperate strategy. The 3rd Regiment was the first unit to fire the first shot. In order to complete the tactical maneuvers of the entire division, this heroic unit had sacrificed too much blood and sacrificed too much. Relying on the strength and firepower of an entire regiment, they were able to hold off the Imperial Mech Squad for 10 minutes. It was truly a tough battle. Even Du Xiaoqing, who only cared about winning and losing and didn't care about life and death, looked at the tragic state of his subordinates on the screen. Although his expression didn't change, his heart was already slightly tense. If an Iron Division didn't experience the baptism of blood and fire on the battlefield, how could it become a truly invincible division? Finally, they left the drill site of the capital ring and came to the bloody front line. The 3rd Regiment held on, while the other regiments watched with their eyes wide open. After being educated, Iron 7th Division went through the first test and knew what the battlefield was like. This was the inevitable process for a highly trained unit to become a truly invincible army. Du Xiaoqing understood this, but he was not as calm as he appeared on the surface as he looked coldly at the battle losses. This was because this was also his first time on the battlefield. This was the first time he saw his subordinates fall and die one after another like rice flowers blown by the wind. He muttered to himself, "Du Xiaoqing, you also received a shocking education. This is good, isn't it?" On the battlefield of the hills and valleys that were close to 20 square kilometers, the situation of the Imperial Moonwolf group was very bad. It was very miserable. In just a short minute, more than 20 Moonwolf 3rd-generation mechas were completely destroyed by the high-speed attacks of the Federation's black mechas. The scene of the black-green mechas burning and falling in the mountains around them, and the bright light of the explosions made the Imperial pilot shock to confirm that these 20 new black Federation mechas completely suppressed the 3rd-generation and even 4th-generation mechas of the Empire in all aspects. It was clearly a situation where they had the advantage in numbers, but because of the terrifying performance of the Federation's black mechas, there was an absolute change in the situation. Many times, it even felt like one black Federation MX was besieging 3 or even 4 Empire mechas. This was not a battle of equal strength at all. The captain of the 2nd Squadron of the Empire, who temporarily took over the position of commander, looked on in despair as the black-green mechas were buried in the mountains and valleys one after another, falling apart, but he could not find a way to deal with it. What made his heart even colder was that from the moment the 20 new Federation mechas appeared, extremely powerful electronic interference and noise echoes covered the entire mountainous battlefield. With such strength and wide range of electronic suppression, the Federal Army's own command system would definitely be completely paralyzed. The Federation people were betting such a huge price to not let their mechas send out a message. What was the reason? No matter how advanced the weapons were, no matter how desperate the situation of the battlefield was, it would not cause the unusually strong and cold soldiers of the Empire to have any thoughts of fear. But at this moment, thinking about the assault brigade that was rushing over from the back, this squadron captain suddenly woke up and shouted loudly in the communication system, "Retreat! Plum blossom formation, disperse! Leave the battlefield!" However, the encirclement was already set. How could Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division let these Empire mechas escape and send out an emergency warning to the brigade behind them? Under the gentle slope of the mountain valley to the southwest, a Moon Wolf 3rd generation mecha that had its right arm almost completely damaged crazily spat out flames as it charged down the slope with no regard for its life. This mecha was the closest to the entrance of the valley. Although it could clearly see that the Federal forces had already set up a dense artillery formation at the entrance of the valley 1 kilometer away, it still tried to charge over. No matter whether it lived or died after charging over, it had to leave the Federation's electronic coverage area and tell the brigade that was rushing over that the Federation people now had an extremely terrifying new mecha. They had to be careful. Whoosh! 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 3 laser-guided rockets drilled out from between the dark mountain rocks and shot towards the black-green mecha. The mecha, whose balance system was severely damaged, could no longer maintain the high speed and mobility it had at the start of the battle. With great difficulty, it dodged twice, narrowly avoiding 2 of the rockets. However, the last laser-guided rocket struck the outer edge of the mecha's mechanical leg viciously. There was a flash of fire and an explosion. The Empire mecha crashed heavily to the ground. A moment later, the mecha forced itself to stand up again. Accompanied by the sound of friction between its alloy structure, it slowly but incomparably madly walked towards the entrance of the valley once more. The word walk could only be used because this mecha speed was already indescribably slow. However, at this moment, 3 more rockets shot out from between the shadowy mountains. Like red dots, they bombarded the body of the gigantic mecha with unparalleled precision. The Empire mecha fell into the flames once more. When it stood up again, the body of the mecha had long been damaged. The charred gaps in the armor looked somewhat sinister. Countless metal components and wires hung pathetically around the mecha. It looked extremely scattered, as if it would fall apart into a pile of dust if it took one more step forward. In reality, this mecha that was closest to the entrance of the valley couldn't even take that step forward. Iron 7 Division's medium-range precision firepower covered its entire body. It was continuously hit, smashed, and then collapsed, unable to get up again. The remaining power of the engine made the body on the ground twitch incessantly, like a dying insect. After a short 2.5 minutes, Iron 7 Division's focus shifted to the next battle. The officers' expressions were serious as they deployed the firepower positions. More than 10,000 Federation soldiers were scattered out of the mountains and even into the distant plains, preparing to welcome the Imperial assault group that was about to arrive. Du Shaoqing took a scalding hot towel from an orderly's hand and wiped his face vigorously. The hot steam couldn't melt his cold expression in the slightest. When he subconsciously looked at the close-up battlefield feed sent back by the monitoring equipment on the mountaintop, a complicated expression appeared on his face. In the center of the feed was a black MX mecha of the Federation. This mecha alone had attracted the attention of as many as 10 Empire mechas. Although this black MX didn't look any different from the MX equipped by Iron 7 Division, he still recognized the identity of the other mecha in the shortest amount of time. This was because this black MX didn't use any long-range fire control system. It only relied on the high RPM alloy knife to slaughter the 10 Empire mechas and force them to retreat again and again. That mech was like a bolt of black lightning, moving up and down like a bolt of lightning. Under the concentrated firepower of the 3rd generation mechs of the Empire, it actually managed to avoid most of the damage, advancing and retreating like a ghost. Every time the high-revving alloy blade extended out of its mechanical arm, Sparks would fly out of the Empire's mech as it miserably retreated. If these 10 Empire mechas hadn't risked their lives to support each other, the Black MX would have destroyed most of them. Du Shaoqing had only seen 2 people in his life who could operate such a terrifying mecha. He narrowed his eyes at the screen and frowned slightly. He thought back to that time in the training base when he and Su Le had a tit-for-tat discussion in the twilight. Now it seemed that if his Iron 7 division had 20 Su Lees, no, even if he only had 10 Su Lees, 10 Black MXs combined with conventional firepower, wouldn't it be easy to wipe out an Imperial mech squad? Perhaps the soldiers of the 3rd Regiment wouldn't have to pay such a terrible price? A moment later, he finally figured it out and reaffirmed his military philosophy. He thought to himself in a self-deprecating manner, there are only a few people in the universe like Su Le, be it the Federation or the Empire. Where can we steal 10 of them? For some reason, Su Le, who had rushed back from afar to participate in this spectacular mecha battle, didn't know that the cold and callous teacher Shaoqing at the peak of the mountain had coincidentally decided to cherish his talent. At this moment, he was moving his hands at high speed in the cockpit with a pale face. Every pair of muscle fibers in his body were squeezing and rubbing against each other, transferring all the force to the MX. This made the mecha below him move faster, faster and faster. In the dense group of mecha, he moved at high speed like a ghost. Jian Shui's face was also pale, but her eyes were abnormally bright as she stared at the screen. Her hands were clenched tightly, and her voice trembled as she said, right again. Right again. Su Le was silent. He thought to himself, this isn't a video game, so why hasn't this national girl fainted from fright? Chapter 421. Reporting to Commander, according to the real-time filtering data, the energy second equivalent of the Northern Defense Line is rapidly decreasing. In the Southern Hemisphere Federation Command Hall, a staff officer picked up the results that the central computer had just calculated a second ago and reported excitedly. The so-called energy second equivalent in the Federation's command system was a chaotic simulation term. This indicator, which was calculated by the Federal Central Computer at high speed, represented the energy difference in the monitoring area. Although the numerical value was not very accurate, it could clearly determine the strength of the Empire's firepower. Very good. Lieutenant General Nelson rubbed his white hair and looked at the tragic north-south boundary line of the planet on the giant holographic screen. The Federal Army's 3rd Defense Line had finally succeeded in resisting the violent attack of the Imperial Expeditionary Force. It seemed that the current ammunition base of the Imperial Expeditionary Force could no longer continue such a crazy offensive. The most important thing was that the land-based missile base in the Northern Hemisphere should also be in the stage of exhaustion. The situation on the planetary battlefield was developing in the Federation's favor. Until now, the Federation officers in the hall who had been silent for a long time finally breathed a sigh of relief. They switched the satellite image of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge to the main holographic screen. They had been silently watching the situation over there, but no one took the initiative to mention this point. Because the federal military could not transfer any forces to support the Iron 7th Division, leaving the Iron 7th Division to face the Imperial Moonwolf Group alone, the command center was worried but helpless. Naturally, it was inevitable that they would remain silent. However, who would have thought that the Iron 7th Division not only perfectly blocked the surprise attack of the Moonwolf Group on Luochio Spaceport, but even looked like they were about to eat the enemy. It seems that we still underestimated the role of the MX Mecha. Lieutenant General Nelson thought of the solemn instructions of Director Zhou Yingxing a month ago. Thinking of Commander Zhong's advice, his eyebrows twitched slightly. He knew that the command center's battle plan was indeed too conservative. Send a telegram to Teacher Shaoqing. I will ask for a reward for them. Lieutenant General Nelson rubbed his slightly wet white hair again. Looking at the battlefield full of flames on the screen, he said with a smile, ask them to stay where they are. As long as they can hold off the last assault brigade of the Imperial Expeditionary Force for another 2 hours, the headquarters will be able to transfer a large number of troops from the dividing line. Victory will definitely belong to us. These were very appropriate words, and Nelson was very satisfied with them. However, a moment later, the senior staff officer standing in front of the command platform turned around and said awkwardly, "The Iron 7th Division has activated a strong electronic suppression on all channels on the battlefield. The frequency interference is too strong. The satellite signal can't enter the division headquarters, so we can't contact them." Lieutenant General Nelson's expression darkened. What was the Iron 7th Division doing? Could it be that the troops in the mountains didn't need to be commanded at all? He immediately thought of a few hours ago that Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, who was in charge of escorting Miss Jian Shuier away, also took the initiative to cut off all communication with the command center. Then he thought of this teacher Xiaoqing, who had cut off all electronic communications. What a pair of lawless fellows. As the commander of the Federal Army, he was naturally annoyed by the appearance of two undisciplined people in the war zone. However, he had to admit that in tonight's battle, it was because of the stunning performance of these two people that the Federation was able to continue with that plan. At this time, the satellite image on the command center's widescreen was zoomed in. A black MX mecha of the Federation was moving across the mountainside, moving between more than 10 Imperial mecha. It was like a wave of wind, swaying in all directions. It was skillfully performing dangerous, yet exquisite evasive maneuvers. The officers in the command center stared blankly at the screen, looking at the black mecha that zigzagged back and forth like a bullet. Their hearts were filled with shock. This was also the first time they had seen the newest generation of the Federation's MX appear on the battlefield. Even though they were mentally prepared, they still didn't think that this new generation of mecha would be so powerful. What was even more powerful was that pilot's operation. In the countless split second of time, the black mecha was able to perform so many complicated operations without a single mistake. It was like a tiger or a lion among the Imperial mecha, roaring and moving like thunder. Although the mecha's movements were not standard, they were exceptionally precise. There was a sense of sharpness in the smooth style, such a powerful level of control. How fast did one's hand speed have to be? Lieutenant General Nelson, like Du Xiaoqing, easily guessed the identity of that pilot. He thought to himself that the people personally selected by the war god were indeed more monstrous than the other 0.5 minutes ago. During the peak period, the effective commands per minute had reached 240, and the average command output value had stopped at a terrifying 150. If it was converted to universal data, Su Li's current hand speed had long exceeded 150. Perhaps some ace pilots who had undergone special training and were physically and mentally strong could reach this level, but they would never be able to reach 240 at the peak of their hand speed. This was because only the control stick and touchscreen were used to output commands. Even if there were 17 speed buttons on the control stick, this value had already exceeded the physiological limits of the human body. It was a value that could only exist in an illusion. Su Lu could because his mecha control method was a triple compound method. In addition to the common methods of normal mecha, there was also a simulation system tightly bound around his body. It accurately captured and magnified every movement of his body, converted it into a data stream, and entered it into the mecha's central control system. However, he was not as relaxed as the Federation officers of the Iron 7th Division and the headquarters thought. The half of his face that was exposed under the helmet was extremely pale, and his body that was suspended in the air began to tremble slightly. It was not because of the strange technique taught by the uncle, but because the accumulated creatine content in his muscle fibers had almost reached its peak and was affecting his body and nervous system. Outside the valley, he silently turned around and instantly killed the Empire's 4th generation mecha, according to Du Xiaoqing's request. He looked silent, cold, and confident, but in reality, he had paid a huge price. In order to defeat and kill the Empire's ace pilot, Su Lu had pushed his mental strength and control to the limit in those 4 seconds. The peak continuously exceeded 240, and the consumption was huge. Commander Love, who was piloting the Empire's 4th generation mecha, was one of the few ace pilots in the Expeditionary Army. If he had not thought of the terrifying maneuverability of the Federation MX under overclocking, he would not have been caught off guard by Su Li's thunderous attack. He would not have been able to last for only 4 seconds before exploding and dying. Sula knew that he was very good at piloting the mecha, but he also knew that if he had been piloting the M52, he would have had to go through a tough battle before he could defeat the opponent. Even if Madman Li had fought him personally, it would have been difficult for him. Not to mention, there were still 9 Empire's 3rd-generation mechas rushing over. After the 4th-generation mecha had exploded, the Black MX did not move. It looked unusually cold as it faced the 9 3rd-generation mechas. In reality, it was only Sulu and the Black Mecha who was tired and needed to rest. However, if the enemy did not move, he would not move. If the Black Mecha did not move, the 9 Empire's mechas that were shocked like statues did not dare to move either. A Black MX versus 9 Empire's mechas. In the quiet night outside the valley, an absurd scene played out. After a while, Sulu heard the sound of cannon fire from the valley in the distance. He knew that the Iron 7 Division had launched a fierce attack. However, he did not know that the Iron 7 Division was also equipped with more than 20 MXs, so he felt a little strange. At this time, he had already completed the mission given by the Iron 7 Division. Even if he took Jian Shuayer and left the 9 Empire's mechas behind, there would be no problem. The Iron 7 Division would only thank him and would not ask for more. However, Sula looked at the 9 Black MXs in front of him through the near-vision screen. As he breathed rapidly, a thought burned like a flame that could not be suppressed. Go back to the valley? Beside him, Jian Shuayer seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. A glimmer of hesitation and courage flashed through her big eyes. The girl clenched her fist tightly and said softly, "Give it a try," as expected of the descendant of the Lees of Philadelphia. In such a tragic battlefield, she did not show the slightest hint of fear. Instead, she seemed a little excited. "Okay, let's give it a try." Hearing the girl's suggestion, Sulu quickly took a few deep breaths. His hands quickly swept across the control stick and the touch screen. At the same time, his body that was suspended in the air suddenly froze. With a whoosh, the Black Mecha rushed towards the 9 3rd-generation Empire's mechas. Like a cruel lion king, it was ready to pounce and bite the jackals that invaded its territory to death. The Black MX turned into a stream of light and knocked down 2 of the nearest 3rd-generation Empire's mechas in the shortest amount of time. The cockpit of one of the Empire's mechas was directly cut open by the Black MX's sharp alloy knife at high speed. Sparks flew all over the sky. The other Empire's mecha was sent flying dozens of meters away by the Black MX. The mecha's engine armor was covered with spider web-like fragments. The mecha's engine died abruptly, splashing mud all over the sky. In fact, in the post-battle statistics, the pilot of this Imperial mecha who had been knocked out by the Black MX was the only survivor of the Moon Wolf mecha team. The Black MX moved, and so did the Empire's mecha. These 9 black and green mechas had long been shocked by Sulu to the point that they had lost most of their will to fight. Thus, when they moved, they did not hesitate to turn and run madly towards the valley. Although the Empire's mecha pilots were brave and cold, this Black MX was already like a black demon in their eyes. It carried a tinge of fear and terror. This was especially so after the tragic defeat of 2 of their companions' mecha, which deepened their perception of the Empire's mecha. Thus, a very strange scene took place at the edge of the battlefield. The 7 black and green Empire's mecha began to turn and run madly. Behind them, only a lone Federation's mecha was madly chasing after them. Previously, it had been more than 100 Empire's mecha chasing after a single Federation mecha. Now, it was a single Federation mecha chasing after a group of Empire's mecha. It looked like some kind of childhood game where you put your arm over your shoulder and said that it was your turn to chase after me. Then, you would laugh and run away. However, how much blood and danger was hidden in the pursuit of these mecha? Just like this, the chase continued. The Black MX chased the 7 Empire's mecha pathetically into the mountain path, into the valley, and past one of the battalions of the Iron 7th Division that had just arrived at the preset position, but had not yet had the time to set up a concentrated artillery formation. All that was left were the shocked gazes of the Federation's soldiers, as well as a particularly enchanting black shadow. Chapter 422. With the old geezer keeping an eye on everything happening in the Southern Hemisphere for him, Su Lun knew even before the Federation HQ did. At the weak point of the Iron Curtain dividing line between the North and the South, the Imperial Assault Group with nearly 20,000 soldiers was moving at high speed towards them. Although he already knew that it was the Iron 7 Division who carried out the ambush mission in the valley, and although he and the Iron 7 Division had a complicated, insignificant, and vexing relationship, and this kind of relationship even sometimes hid a kind of hostility between life and death, he still could not watch the Iron 7 Division be besieged by the Imperial Expeditionary Army. Because those young soldiers were his fellow countrymen, young men just like him. The powerful electronic interference that covered dozens of square kilometers made it impossible for him to contact the officers of the Iron 7th Division through the battlefield command system. But when he thought that the HQ should have notified Du Shaoqing, Su Lu relaxed a little. But he didn't know that the Iron 7th Division had more than 20 MXs in the valley, so he was very worried. These worries turned into a ball of fire. Following the hesitant but encouraging words of the young girl beside him, the invisible fire spewed out from the back of the black MX and directly shot him back into the valley battlefield. With this chase, his black MX chased all the way to the center of the battlefield. This was the area with the most terrifying firepower. Countless streaks of light flashed across the top of the mech's head. The smoke and sound of explosions enveloped the sky and earth. The bullets fired by the mountain howitzers were like violent men, tearing apart the clothes of weak young girls, tearing apart the dark night sky with a sizzling sound. Of the 7 Imperial mechs that were chased back to the battlefield by the Black MX, one was destroyed on the way back, and the other 2 fled in fear. Only 4 were left. But Su Lu didn't even have time to rest. The SCC monitoring system sent out an alarm. In the area where he was, 4 Imperial mechs were charging at him at high speed. For +4? How many mechs were there? This was not a problem in mathematics, but rather a problem in the heart. Su Lu made use of the little bit of bravery that had been stirred up on the battlefield tonight to charge back into the battlefield in silence. The Imperial mecha, who had been fleeing in all directions under the powerful attacks of the MX fleet of Iron 7 Division, suddenly saw this black MX with clearly different controls. It was as if the Imperial mecha had sunk into despair, as if they were a pack of wounded wolves that had been chased to the edge of a cliff by a pride of lions, only to suddenly see a lion suddenly appear in their midst. If he could bite this lion to death, even if he died, it would be more pleasant and meaningful. Every Imperial mecha pilot who saw this black MX felt a fire ignite in their hearts. This sort of desperation before death and the strong psychological effect of suicidal thoughts caused the Empire's 3rd-generation mecha to suddenly unleash a powerful burst of power. Ignoring the serious damage they suffered, they forcibly broke away from the powerful attack range of the Iron 7th Division's MX mecha. They supported and covered each other as they moved to surround Su Li's black MX. There were no communications or orders. At the same time, many Imperial mecha also made this crazy choice. At this time, the battlefield command system of Iron 7th Division had temporarily been disabled. The Federation pilots operating the Black MX mecha obviously did not understand the intentions of the Imperial pilots. They were slightly stunned and could only watch as the Imperial mecha in front of them retreated without any regard for their lives, rushing down the valley. The Iron 7th Division pilots were very surprised. How could the Imperial pilots be so heroic in their escape? And where could they run to now? They did not know that the Imperial mecha were not running away, but were trying to drag down the person at the bottom before they died. And this person was Su Lu. Don't blame the soldiers of the Imperial Moonwolf group for being so excited when they saw Su Li's Black MX as if they had taken an aphrodisiac. It was just that his mecha piloting skills were too easy to recognize. This Black MX did not have any long-range firepower. It only relied on its insanely powerful mecha piloting skills to sweep through the wilderness. It was so eye-catching in the smoke of the night, so enchanting. It was the culprit who killed Captain Love and led the Moonwolf group into danger. After 4 mecha piloting, for more mecha piloting, and 4 more mecha piloting, As far as the field of vision could see, all the Imperial mecha piloting the Black MX did not need any orders. They rushed madly towards the Black MX at the bottom of the valley. Knowing that they were going to die, these Imperial pilots only had one thought left, and that was to drag this Black MX into the galaxy of death. On the screen, the Imperial mecha piloting the Black MX 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 mecha. Although there were not many of them, their momentum was extremely frightening. Su Li's face turned even paler. He did not have time to blame the Iron 7th Division's mecha battalion for their slow reaction speed. He already felt an unusually clear sense of danger. If he could reduce the pressure on the Iron 7th Division's mecha battalion, he believed that this mecha battle would end faster. Su Lu rushed into the battlefield with this thought in mind, so he did not mind attracting the attention of 4 mecha, even if there were 8 third-generation Imperial mecha circling the valley at high speed. However, what was shocking was that he alone had attracted the attention of 16 Imperial mecha. Su Lu and his Black MX were very strong, but he was definitely not stupid and naive enough to think that he was really fierce, violent, and invincible. Killing a 4th-generation Imperial mecha in one hit did not mean that he could ignore the siege of 16 third-generation Imperial mecha. Moreover, his piloting style was much more taxing on his body and mind compared to the average pilot. At this time, he was already extremely tired. The most important thing was that although the MX was a machine, it was also worn out. CLK, 84 points. CLS, 17 seconds of overload. The emotionless alarm of the central control system rang out in the dull cockpit. These 2 data clouds were the most important comprehensive calculation values of a mecha. They were used to evaluate the overall operating condition of a mecha. The latter would usually break through the peak earlier than the former. If both were to break through the peak at the same time, then many of the MX mecha's components could be affected. The most obvious point was that the onboard ADS adaptive suspension system would inevitably enter an active state of wear and tear. The former had already exceeded 84 points, while the latter had exceeded the peak by 17 seconds. As one of the designers of the MX mecha, Su Lun naturally knew how unstable the mecha's condition was now. However, this could not be blamed on the mecha. It should be known that at Cat Peak, Little White Flower was still able to hold on for so long after entering the overclocking state. It was just that tonight's battle situation was too tragic. The moment the Black MX entered the overclocking state, it began to continuously receive Su Li's high-speed commands. All 3 systems were in overload. The MX was really suffering under his piloting. If he didn't do that, he wouldn't be able to kill Lav in one hit and chase after the 9 mechas of Empire. He wouldn't be able to do such a weird dance while being surrounded by 16 mechas of Empire. With a whoosh, the alloy blade at the front end of the Black MX's right mechanical arm slashed down fiercely, creating a deep gash on the left shoulder of one of the Imperial mecha. At the same time, the thick mechanical leg's hydraulic system suddenly compressed, shattering the rocks on the ground. The heavy body of the mecha drifted to the right like a fallen leaf, dodging the 3 high-speed cannon fire from behind. The Black MX's speed did not decrease at all. Like a shadow, it swept past the 2 Imperial mecha in front of it. The huge body of the mecha completed an unimaginable twisting movement in midair, dodging the attacks of the 2 Imperial mecha that had been charging up for a long time. However, another round of cannon fire came from the side. The Black MX could not turn around and destroy the 2 Imperial mecha at all. Every second, Imperial mecha would fearlessly pounce on the Black MX. Gorgeous cannon fire would explode. Danger was constantly singing a heart-stopping ballad beside the Black MX. In just a few short seconds, another 2 Imperial mecha were stripped of their combat power by the Black MX's strange and trembling steps. However, at the same time, another 3 surviving Imperial mecha rushed over. In the stuffy cockpit, only the sound of Su Li's heavy breathing could be heard. Beside him, the girl's cheeks were flushed red. Nervously pursing her lips, she seemed to have forgotten to breathe. The pale-faced youth's hands quickly swept across the control stick and touchscreen. His movements were so fast that they seemed to have turned into a series of afterimages. In this moment of life and death, no one knew what kind of peak his hand speed had reached. Moreover, most of the orders were still transmitted through the simulated reality system. Even he did not know how he had passed these 10 seconds of trepidation. In that split second of time, he had completely relied on his innate battle instincts and his intimate understanding of the mecha to subconsciously operate the mecha. In front of the frenzied Imperial mecha, Su Lu was still calm. However, his trembling body and hands had already gone crazy. The Black MX followed his precise orders and made one after another incredible, unimaginable evasive maneuvers. In the darkness of the valley, the Black MX was as swift as a ghost, as swift as a knife. If the pilots of the Imperial Moonwolf group were facing a situation where they were completely wiped out, or if it was because of the death of Captain Love, they had become obsessed with the Black MX as if they had taken an aphrodisiac of death. In the cockpit, Jin Sher had already entered a state of absent-mindedness. Her thin military uniform and short skirt were soaked with sweat, and her slender and white thighs were smeared with light. The scent of a young girl on her body, to Su Lu, was similar to an aphrodisiac. Was this also related to the fact that he could continuously perform so many peak-level maneuvers? More than 10 seconds later, the valley battlefield gradually calmed down. Su Lu alone attracted almost 20 Imperial mecha. The pressure on the Iron 7th Division mecha was suddenly reduced. They ended the surrounding battles early and then silently and urgently rushed to the rescue at high speed. At this time, they had already appeared on the gentle slope. The gentle slopes that could be seen everywhere in the Yellow Mountain Ridge and the Lonely Mountain Ridge were actually trenches created by the flow of the planet once every 3,000 years. In this lonely trench, the last 12 surviving Imperial mecha stood alone. Right in the middle of them was the Black MX. The final desperate plan of the Imperial mecha to surround and kill the Black MX had finally come to nothing. The surviving pilots of the Moonwolf Brigade looked at the Black Federation mecha in the middle and truly fell into despair. The self-destruct system of the mecha was an internal destruction system. At this time, even if these 10 Imperial mecha surrounded the Black MX and collectively self-destructed, they would not be able to destroy the Black MX. Chapter 4:23. Attitude decided everything. This was just a very sportsmanlike slogan used in sports competitions. Although sports competitions were known as wars in the era of peace, compared to a real battlefield, it was just a game of house. On this bloodfire planet at the edge of the universe where bullets were always more powerful than logic, the only thing that could truly decide everything was power. More specifically, in tonight's ambush or assault in the southwestern part of the planet, what could decide everything was the performance of the mecha. Imperial Expeditionary Force, Maple Forest Alliance, Special Moonwolf Group. This was a very long list of names. The length of the name often represented its importance. These words could help to confirm that these Imperial mecha pilots were very good at controlling their mecha, definitely better than the Iron 7 Division's mecha battalion. At the very least, it was impossible for them to be weaker than them. However, more than 100 third-generation mecha from the Imperial Federation were defeated miserably in the face of more than 20 new mecha from the Federation. There was no way they could fight back at all. The sounds of battle and explosions around them completely stopped in a very short amount of time. Iron 7 Division quickly cleared the outer battlefield. In the entire mountainous area, only a dozen tattered Imperial mecha remained. They were heavily surrounded by Federation mecha groups and heavy firepower units. The usually strong and heavy black-green mecha were now so weak and tired. There was no way for them to break out of the encirclement. The war between the Federation and the Empire was a war of life and death that had been condensed for decades. The lives of tens of millions of people were used as bargaining chips. The pressure was so cold and hard that the hearts of both sides were as cold and hard as iron. In the eyes of the people of the Federation, the people of the Empire were wild beasts. In the eyes of the people of the Empire, the people of the Federation were hypocritical and cruel mutants. A deep trench had long been drawn between the two races that could never be filled up. After several decades, the encounter between the two neighbors had long since turned into a bloody race war that fought for the small space of survival in the vast universe. Humans would not surrender like pigs. This was a very simple principle, so the people of the Empire would not surrender to the Federation either. The 10 or so third-generation Moon Wolf mechas that were already at the end of their rope launched their final desperate and frenzied attacks amidst the ear-piercing sounds of grinding metal. This final attack was still aimed at Su Li's Black MX mech in the middle. Even further away, 20 or so Black MXs from the Federation charged forward at high speed from all sides of the gentle slope. This was a picture of a big ring within a small ring, but it didn't make people feel that it was ridiculous or funny. There was only the coldness and madness of death, and the desperation that was clearly transmitted to every speck of dust in the valley. Tragic was a phrase used to describe the final frenzy of the last mecha of the Empire. Loud metallic clangs rang out incessantly as explosions occurred one after another. More than 10 small green-gray mushroom clouds rose up from the gentle slope from time to time. Sulu slowly took off his helmet and quietly looked at the last first-generation Empire mecha that had fallen to the ground not too far away. He looked at the explosion in the cockpit of that mecha, and his mood was a little strange. He could understand why the soldiers of the Empire didn't want to surrender, but he couldn't imagine what kind of ideology this group of soldiers, who had spent more than 7 years to come to a foreign country, relied on to shamelessly invade the Federation without batting an eyelid, crazily slaughter the people of the Federation, and finally kill themselves in the end. Could it be that the people of the Empire were really born to be so cold-blooded and heartless? Or could it be that the fanatical worship of the Emperor in the Imperial Society had turned countless people into lunatics? The last 10 or so Empire mecha had already lost their spirit. This last suicidal charge didn't cause too much damage to his Black MX. He used the fastest time to leave the battlefield. He didn't have the energy to help Iron 7 Division's Mecha Battalion anymore. He could only watch with his own eyes and think silently in his heart. In less than 3 minutes, Iron 7 Division had completely wiped out one of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's mecha battalions. The ultra-strong electronic interference finally stopped, and Du Xiaoqing's usual calm voice came through the MX mecha's comm system. "You've worked hard." Sulu was slightly taken aback, but didn't say anything. His palm lightly pushed on the control stick, and the black mecha slowly turned around on the slope. He left the Iron 7 Division's mecha battalion that was cleaning up the battlefield and walked out of the valley silently and heavily. The 20 or so black mechas of Iron 7 Division were cleaning up the last of the battlefield. They were trying to find a living Empire soldier in one of the cockpits that had severely imploded, but they found that their efforts were in vain. Right at this moment, they noticed that the Black MX of the Federation, which had played the most important role in tonight's battle, was leaving. The 20 or so black mechas almost simultaneously stopped what they were doing. Accompanied by the muffled sound of motors and hydraulic pipes, they saluted the Black MX that was walking down the slope and then silently watched it leave. Until now, most of the soldiers of Iron 7 Division still didn't know who was in the Black MX, but this didn't stop them from showing their respect to this mecha. There was still an entire regiment in the mountainous area. The heavy infantry and artillery soldiers all walked out of their positions and began preparing for the next battle while smiling as they watched the Black MX leave. There were also many people who watched the Black MX leave, such as the officers in the Southern Hemisphere Federation Command Center, who were extremely far away, were all stunned speechless. On a mountain peak somewhere, Du Xiaoqing also took off his sunglasses. He watched the Black MX's heavy and even somewhat clumsy footsteps on the holographic screen in silence. The real-time battle report from the central mainframe was already out. Su Li's Black MX had one-shot one of the Empire's 4th-generation Moonwolf mecha, defeated 5 3rd-generation mecha, and caused 4 3rd-generation mecha to lose their ability to fight. This meant that he had single-handedly taken out 1/10 of the Moonwolf group's combat power. Du Xiaoqing's brows furrowed slightly. He abruptly thought of a certain young officer who should be on another planet right now. That young officer was also a lieutenant colonel like Su Li. In the past 5 years, Madman Li's battle record book had recorded the destruction of more than 100 Empire mecha. This kind of battle record was without a doubt the most insane number in history. However, today, in just one short hour, Su Li's mecha could spray out 6 stars. At this rate, perhaps it wasn't impossible to catch up to Madman Li. Of course, Li Feng had basically been carrying out special missions for the past 5 years, and his opponents were often the true masters of the Empire's Royal Special Mecha Battalion. This comparison wasn't fair. What really made Du Qing frown was not the shocking battle record of the Black MX controlled by Su Lu earlier, but the final scene where the Black MX had led the last of the Empire's mecha in circles in the mountains. In the final moments, the Black MX hadn't been able to defeat any more mecha. Instead, it had seemed rather pathetic and dangerous. However, under the relentless pursuit of the Empire's mecha, what the Black MX had done seemed simple, but the fact that it had been able to survive was already shocking. Du Xiaoqing's eyes were extremely sharp. He knew very well that if Su Lu had made the slightest mistake in his judgment, or if his operation had been just a fraction of a second slower, he would have been piled up like a pile of leaves by those crazed Empire mecha. Then, regardless of friend or foe, they would have gone all out to burn him. What are this person's nerves made of? To be able to remain as calm as a machine in this kind of situation, not making a single mistake, Du Xiaoqing mused silently. Unlike the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division who were watching the Black MX leave, although this iron-blooded division commander thanked Su Lu for his hard work, he didn't feel any gratitude in his heart. From his perspective, Su Lu was a soldier of the Federation. Tonight, the army needed him. Since he had the ability, it was only natural that he should listen to orders. If it were him, Du Xiaoqing, he would have made the same choice as Su Lu. Division Commander Du Xiaoqing was a standard Federation soldier. Although he loathed Su Lu, he still abided by his duties as a soldier. He would never do anything shady on the battlefield. However, as he watched the Black MX gradually disappear into the night, a strange thought suddenly welled up in his mind. If one day Su Lu became an enemy of the Federation, if he was inside the mecha, how many people would I need to capture or kill him? A battalion or a regiment? Or the entire Iron 7th Division? At almost the same time, the invisible old thing on the surface of the planet and the Federation's command center told Su Lu through different channels that the road to Luo Chio spaceport was very safe. The main forces on the north-south dividing line were conducting a high-speed maneuver deployment. He and his Black MX could take a break. Su Lu was slightly startled. He took off the thin but heavy simulation system with great difficulty. Once his mind relaxed, even this small movement made him clearly feel the intense soreness in his muscle fiber bundles. This kind of soreness was an unbearable pain. He couldn't help but purse his lips tightly and let out a muffled groan. The accumulated sweat flowed down his naked body like water overflowing from a pool. It flowed out from the simulation system and wet the entire lower half of the cockpit. It added a lot of unpleasant smells to the stuffy cockpit. Luckily, the MX Mecha was waterproof both inside and outside. Su Lu thought self-deprecatingly as he dragged the black box with difficulty and took out his clothes. He wiped his body carelessly and then hurriedly put them on. Just these few movements made him groan in pain several times in succession. An unhealthy blush appeared on his pale face. Su Lu took a few deep breaths. He felt sore, tired, and hungry. These adjectives were about to knock him down. However, Luo Chio spaceport was still very far away from the pocket of his military uniform. Su Lu took out a pack of 37 brand cigarettes that had long been crushed out of shape. With trembling fingers, he lit one up. He greedily inhaled deeply and then sprayed it into the sealed cockpit. Only then did he remember that the person he was supposed to protect, the nation's maiden, was still sitting beside him. Running for thousands of miles, mecha chasing and escaping, fighting in the valley, exploding to kill the enemy. Tonight's scenes had already caused Jian Shui's small face to turn pale, especially the exquisite mecha piloting skills Su Lu had displayed. It made her eyes light up, and she was mesmerized. Although the maiden was brave, she was after all not a man made of iron. She was a professional soldier who had been through a lot. Her body was already extremely weak. Right now, she was clutching at her chest, feeling nauseous. Suddenly, she saw the red dot on the lips of the young man beside her. She subconsciously reached out her hand, and after a slight stiffening, she carefully took it off. Her slender fingers were trembling uncontrollably. Her action of holding the cigarette was unfamiliar. In order to hide her panic, she took a deep breath and then coughed violently. Chapter 424. Hearing the coughing beside him, Su Lu was slightly startled. He took the cigarette from her hand and asked, "You haven't smoked before?" Jian Shui's purple hair, mixed with perspiration, stuck to her pink cheeks. She nodded lightly. No matter how calm she appeared on the surface, after this night, there was still some lingering fear in her heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thought of testing the strange taste of the cigarette. If you haven't smoked before, then don't smoke. Su Lu held the cigarette in his mouth and said vaguely. The half-burnt cigarette stuck to his cracked lips and trembled with his words, as if he was fishing. The cockpit of the mecha was oppressive and the communication system was silent. Su Lu could roughly imagine that the Iron 7th Division in the valley should have already started preparing for the upcoming second bloody battle. However, he and this Black MX were already exhausted to the extreme. He wanted to kill the enemy, but he couldn't turn around. He could only use his fingers to push the control stick and slowly drive the Black MX on the military road to Luoqiu Airport. Not bad. At this moment, a white symbol flashed in the vision of Su Li's left eye. He had already taken off his special helmet, so these words naturally didn't appear on the holographic screen, but in his mind. Of course, only that old bastard could create such a mysterious scene. This Black MX mecha that had been carefully modified by Shangqiu and the Nutshell engineering team had maximized Su Li's operating ability to the extreme. However, it wasn't designed with autopilot. Su Li stared at the symbol in his left eye and suddenly had a strong urge to squeeze the old bastard's strength. If the glory of the charter was a mountain of treasures, then today Su Li had been sitting on the edge of this glittering mountain and eating his meal. He had to eat as much as he could, otherwise, before he ran out of treasures. Who knew if the charter computer would go crazy and come crashing down on him? I'm very tired. Help me drive this MX to Luoqiu Airport. Su Li chuckled, silently saying this in his heart. Then he let go of his hands that were controlling the mecha and leaned back tiredly but comfortably into his special seat cushion. Maybe you'll feel better after sleeping for a while. I'm already impressed that you didn't throw up. He carefully untied Jian Shui's tightly bound clothes, allowing the girl's body, which had been restrained for a long time, to welcome a temporary release. When the soft bulge under the military uniform returned to its original shape, it was a soul-stirring and graceful scene. The dark short skirt was no longer pulled up by the shy rope, and the two slender, smooth, and tight legs could finally be covered by the dazzling spring scenery. This process was even more seductive than the previous scene. If it had been in the past, every inch of Jian Shui's youthful body would have made Su Li open his beady eyes wide to explore the beauty within. At this moment, however, he was already so tired that he could not speak. Seeing Jian Shui close her eyes tiredly, he naturally closed his own eyes as well. The glory of the charter, which freely traversed the atmosphere of the universe and planets, and the Federal Central Computer, which was at the core of the light, after hearing Su Li's request, did not express any more opinions. Neither the Federation nor the Empire had developed the technology to remotely control battleships or mecha. This was because the structures of battleships and mecha were abnormally complex, not as simple as the miniature surveillance aircraft commonly used by the Empire. The current computing power of the computers in the universe could not support remote control. Even the extremely powerful Federal Central Computer, the federal military, had never attempted to allow it to complete this kind of remote, autonomous control. Firstly, they did not have the authority to do so. Secondly, in their opinion, although the Federal Central Computer's computing power was amazing, it was ultimately just a cold machine. It could be imitated as much as it wanted, but it could never truly support the extremely complex operations. In addition to data calculation and environmental monitoring feedback, it also required intuitive judgment operations. However, at this moment in the dull cockpit, a young man and woman fell into a deep sleep. The heavily damaged black MX Mecha, under the condition that no one was controlling it, gradually began to increase its speed. It smoothly and accurately crossed the mountains, the mountain roads, and the fields, heading towards the Luochio spaceport in the distance. At this moment, the black mecha was really like a black ghost. The low and powerful roar of the engines shattered the silence of the night. Countless heavy Imperial armored vehicles and the 14 third-generation Moon Wolf mechas mixed in with the Vanguard mercilessly crushed the fertile soil on the planet's surface. The engines that used hydrogen fuel did not have a bad smell, but the high-speed advance of such a large force still left behind an unpleasant smell of engine oil in the air. The last reorganized force of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance, the Reserve Assault Brigade, had already arrived at the area very close to the front line of the Yellow Mountain Ridge. After a continuous night of large-scale air and ground joint transport and the mechanized rapid march after breaking into the Southern Hemisphere, the Empire soldiers in the fields as dense as the grassland felt a wave of fatigue. The establishment of a brigade in the Empire was larger than that of a division in the Federation. Not to mention, this assault brigade was the last trump card of the Maple Forest Alliance. Its soldiers were close to 20,000 people, and its armored firepower was also the strongest in the Alliance. The highest commander of this assault brigade was Major General Hughes. Under the puzzled eyes of the staff officers, the 40-year-old general ordered all the troops to slow down the speed of the advance. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the image he had just received. He fell into deep thought, and the wrinkles on his forehead piled up particularly heavy. 10 minutes ago, when he lost the coordinates and information of the Moonwolf group, Major General Hughes knew that something must have happened in front of him. However, military orders must be obeyed. In addition, after confirming that there was only one division in the Yellow Mountain Ridge area, he only asked the electronic troops to increase the anti-interference force and began to build a temporary position command system. He did not ask the troops to slow down the speed of the advance until the few remaining miniature aircraft of the Empire sent back a few still images. There were not many miniature surveillance aircraft scattered in the Southern Hemisphere like locusts, and these few surveillance aircraft had no way to get close to the Yellow Mountain Ridge area. They could only take a few pictures from an extremely long distance. The pictures were very tragic. Those familiar black and blue mecha tragically collapsed in the valleys on the ground, burning and deforming. Major General Hughes's face was like iron. He could not understand how a single division in the Federation could eat an entire mecha brigade led by Lov. However, the pictures in front of him told him that this was the truth. What should he do now? Sitting in the command armored vehicle, he slowly closed his eyes. After a while, he suddenly opened them, and a trace of ferocity flashed through his eyes. His assault team was already stronger than the Federal Division to begin with. In addition, although the Federal Division had wiped out the entire Moonwolf Mecha clan, they must have paid an extremely heavy price. He had a very good chance of wiping out the entire Federal Division. Then, he would directly attack Luochio Spaceport, then take a detour to the north and threaten the Federation's vital military depot. From there, he would write the most important chapter of the North-South War on the planet's surface. He must continue to attack. Suddenly, Major General Hughes's expression froze, because in the Imperial New Moon command system in front of him, an old voice rang out. Retreat. The Imperial armies had strict hierarchy and discipline. Although Major General Hughes was disappointed and even angry, since this was the command center, and it was old General Umbree's order, he had to accept it. In the shortest amount of time, he issued the order to retreat to the entire assault brigade. However, at this moment, Major General Hughes made a fatal mistake. He left behind the Mecha Brigade and the Heavy Mecha Brigade, and tried to use mechanical cooperation and shoulder-launched electromagnetic beam bombs to deal with the Federation's most mobile Mecha Brigade. From a standard military plan, this arrangement was not wrong. The Imperial Brigade had to retreat without firing a single shot, so they had to retreat completely. In his opinion, As long as they could choke the Federal Army's fastest mecha squad to death, there was no way the Federal Army would be able to catch up to the fully mechanized Imperial Brigade that had not suffered any losses in the wilderness that stretched for 200 kilometers. At the exit of the valley, Shimin Jin took off her earpiece and said to Du Xiaoqing, "The enemy is preparing to retreat." When the Moonwolf group was wiped out in 3 minutes, the 3 mecha clans of the Iron 7th Division secretly withdrew from the mountain area. Under the cover of the night, they advanced towards the north and set up an ambush circle in the forest. However, before the two sides came into contact with each other, the Empire forces retreated first. This did not shock Du Xiaoqing, because any possible changes in the battle situation were within his tactical calculations. In fact, he had long been prepared for the decisive retreat of the Imperial troops. Under his calm and clear command, the entire Iron 7th Division left the valley. It looked like they were preparing for an ambush, but in reality, they were already prepared for a high-speed pursuit. This outstanding Major General of the Federation slowly put on his sunglasses and said, "Inform the troops to keep chasing. Even if we chase to 30 degrees north latitude, we cannot lose them until we chase these Empire forces off our land." The first to clash fiercely, the first to light up half of the night sky, was the Mecha Battalion of the Empire forces, the Heavy Infantry branch, and more than 20 of the Federation's new MX mechas. The Empire forces originally wanted to use the mechas as a distraction, but the Heavy Infantry carried universal launchers and fired concentrated electromagnetic beam bombs to eliminate this group of Federation mecha that were clearly at the front. However, they found that they had made a fatal mistake. The unparalleled weapon used to deal with mechas on the battlefield, those concentrated electromagnetic beam bombs, could not hit the Federation mechas at all. After the electromagnetic beam bombs exploded, the blue arcs of high-voltage material gushed out, spreading out such a large effective attack radius. But it still could not lock onto the Federation mecha in an effective area. The mobility of these Black Federation mechas was too strong, and their speed was too fast. The Empire's Heavy Infantry Division fired these electromagnetic beam bombs 4 out of 5, but in the end, only 3 of the Black Federation mechas were destroyed. What was even more frightening was that while the Empire soldiers were still adhering to the inherent rules of teamwork, fighting and retreating at the same time, the Federation's Black Mecha had long abandoned all of those rules and regulations. Relying on their powerful firepower and performance, they launched a high-speed group charge. Like an extremely tightly clenched heavy metal fist, they smashed viciously into the Empire's final line of defense. Like a knife piercing through a piece of paper, the Black Federation mecha broke through this line of defense and chased after the Empire's armored brigade in the field not far away. Behind them, the Iron 7th Division's armored vehicles roared and roared, also increasing their speed. Chapter 425. On the huge screen, red arrows were rapidly expanding from south to north. These red arrows represented the Iron 7th Division. More than 10 kilometers ahead of the Iron 7th Division, the Blue Imperial armies were trying to escape from the battlefield as quickly as possible. However, the mixed mechanized platoon they left behind to stop them had long become some kind of sacrifice for the Iron 7th Division's fierce offensive. Now, they could not complete their mission of retreating at all. The Imperial Assault Group should have been defending and waiting for reinforcements at this time, but the military intelligence they received from the Northern Hemisphere Command was very bad. The situation on the north-south dividing line had fundamentally changed. 2 divisions of the Federation were rushing in from the northeast. If the enemy blocked the 20,000-man army south of the dividing line, what awaited them would be a crushing defeat. Therefore, this automated platoon could only try their best to retreat as quickly as possible. The Iron 7th Division attacked from 3 directions, crazily pouncing out from the Mayan plains and chasing after the enemy across the mountains and plains. When they were about to reach the rear of the Imperial Brigade, the 3 iron streams suddenly split into countless low-level combat platoons and stabbed toward the rear of the Imperial Brigade. On the screen, The crimson blocks that represented the Iron 7th Division suddenly split into many lines. They did not care about the coverage of the enemy's firepower at all and rushed forward fearlessly. There was no division or encirclement, and there was no roundabout way. There was only the most direct of straight lines. And when these straight lines that represented a battalion or even a company bit fiercely into the Imperial platoon, the ends of the lines suddenly opened up again and cleverly began to divide the firepower, and then bit down on the Imperial platoon in an orderly manner. Clouds of smoke floated in the wild night from time to time. In the dozens of square kilometers of combat area that was stretched into the shape of leaves, there were blinding lights and explosions at the same time. Specific orders were sent out from the electronic command system of the Iron 7th Division headquarters, passing through the pungent air and the dust of the explosions, and transmitted to every single combat platoon. Sometimes, orders were even directly issued to platoon-level combat units, calmly and skillfully commanding the federal forces like countless sharp knives, cutting the Imperial armies into bloody pieces. The commander of the Iron 7th Division was Du Shaoqing. This famous general of a generation, who had never been on a real battlefield, finally demonstrated his commanding ability and terrifying mental fortitude in the smoke of this planet. He was like the most brilliant conductor in the universe. Waving the stick in his hand softly, he had the complete control of an enormous and complicated ancient music orchestra in his hands. Even the tiniest change in tone or the smallest movement of the performers could not escape his eyes. But Du Shaoqing did not arrogantly try to personally command every single battle on the battlefield, because he knew very well that he was not a charter computer with superhuman computing power. He was only following the tactical calculations of the General Staff Department. At this time, the countless parameters given to him by the glory of the charter allowed him to judge the situation and adjust the general direction of every battle at any time, thus winning the final victory for his Iron 7th Division. The Imperial Assault Group was the trump card of the Expeditionary Army to begin with. Even though they were being chased by the ruthless and relentless attacks of the Iron 7th Division, they still did not panic. The soldiers of the Empire still fought bravely and valiantly. But when faced with the 20 or so black MX mechas that were like tigers in a flock of sheep, they found it extremely difficult to deal with. An hour later, in a certain valley that was still a considerable distance away from the north-south dividing line, the retreating Imperial Brigade could no longer endure the incessant attacks of the Federation mecha and the incessant attacks of the retreating Federation mecha. The entire army instantly spread out on their own initiative and began to fight in small squads. They increased their speed and avoided the attacks behind them as they sprinted towards the northern hemisphere at high speed. At this point in the battle, whether it was the retreating Imperial Brigade or the pursuing Iron 7th Division, it was very difficult for them to maintain their formation. Like countless balls, they began to run wildly across the plains. Sometimes, a Federation battalion would be sandwiched between two Empire battalions. Sometimes, a small Empire battalion would find themselves despairingly surrounded by more than 400 Federation tanks. The pursuit turned into a chaotic battle. At this moment, the accurate monitoring of the battlefield by the central computer of the Federation and the commanding ability of Du Shaoqing and the officers of the headquarters, who could not have been calmer and more meticulous, finally played their biggest role. In the darkness of the night, the Imperial Brigade that was like an axe had long been turned into countless fierce and wild pieces of metal. The Iron 7th Division that was like a machete had also been broken into pieces. However, they were like countless sharp knives. It seemed chaotic, but in reality, there was order amidst the chaos. Every company that was in the midst of the complex terrain clearly knew their position, their mission, and still maintained a fierce attacking posture in the Southern Hemisphere Federation Command Center. Commander Shaoqing, you really live up to your reputation. As a high-ranking military officer in the West Woods, Lieutenant General Nelson did not have a good impression of Du Shaoqing and the Iron 7th Division. However, today, after personally witnessing Du Shaoqing's command and the valiant military quality of the Iron 7th Division, he still felt a sense of admiration. Although the Empire's assault brigade showed no signs of truly collapsing, at this rate, by the time the Federation's two divisions that went to reinforce the Empire's assault brigade in the south, victory was already set in stone. Scenes like this on the battlefield were constantly happening in the narrow area at the northern end of the southern hemisphere of Planet 5460. The Empire's Maple Forest Alliance, which had forcefully launched a surprise attack in the south and successfully killed its way to the Federation's third defense line, was like a high-speed cannonball that had shot through countless layers of alloy baffles. At the moment of exhaustion, the tide-like offensive was contained, and the Federal Army, which had been pressured to the point of suffocation, began to gain a rare moment of respite. Then, under the orders of the Federation Command Center and the guidance of the glory of the Charter, the Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere began a counterattack. The Cold Charter computer could not completely dominate the war on this planet. It only provided the most terrifying battlefield data and real-time, comprehensive monitoring for the Federation Command Center to formulate a plan. At the same time, the powerful computing power of the Charter computer also began to carry out the most detailed tactical deduction for the counterattack. However, this magnificent counterattack did not achieve as great a result as the Iron 7th Division on the front line north of the Yellow Mountain Ridge. On the one hand, the Federation's main force was under the continuous and terrifying attacks of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance. Their own morale and equipment had been greatly depleted, so it was difficult for a hasty counterattack to display their might. More importantly, before the Federal Army began their counterattack, those roaring, cold-blooded Imperial Expeditionary Force that had been continuously attacking suddenly seemed to have received some kind of order and instantly began to retreat. These Empire's troops attacked like a tidal wave and retreated like a tidal wave. When they attacked, they did not care about the fact that they had all died in battle. When they retreated, they were silent to the extreme. Only in the 300-square battle zones on the north-south dividing line were countless corpses from both sides, as well as tens of thousands of tons of dirt and charred chariots and mecha wreckages that filled the field of vision. Umbori, you're really ruthless. But what exactly are you thinking? Lieutenant General Nelson's white eyebrows furrowed together. Looking at the receding Imperial Expeditionary Force on the light screen, his heart was abnormally heavy. No matter the cost, they had thrown away more than 40,000 corpses, moved out their family assets hidden in the glaciers, wasted so much ammunition, and finally reached the Federation's last line of defense. In the end, with one order from the command center, the bloodthirsty Empire's soldiers retreated without hesitation. They did not linger in the battle, nor did they lament as a senior commander. Lieutenant General Nelson knew very well that such a large group retreat on the front line proved the terrifying military quality and discipline of these Empire soldiers. Countless chariots rumbled across the planet's surface that was riddled with holes. The great battle of hundreds of thousands of people was played out in the darkness before dawn. The entire planet was playing out one magnificent and eye-catching scene after another. The 15 main divisions of the Federal Army set out to attack the Northern Hemisphere. This had already entered the third phase of the Ministry of Defense's plan. Under the guidance of the glory of the Charter, they chose the route to advance at high speed. Once they entered the Northern Hemisphere, they would lose this advantage. No one knew that the Federal Central Computer, which was busy guiding the planetary battle, was actually doing something else at this moment. That was driving for people, or in other words, turning on the engines. A wisp of white willow appeared at the edge of the sky. The faint light shone on Luochio Airport, illuminating the heavy firepower weapons with a charming metallic luster. A tremor came from the distant night forest. A severely damaged black mech walked into the base under the aim of countless heavy weapons. The officer of the airport, who had already received the information, drove a ladder car to the front of the tall mech. The hatch of the black mech slowly opened. Su Lu, whose face was pale, carried the still unconscious Jian Shui out of the mech under the shocked eyes of countless Federation soldiers. After waking up, Jian Shui was taken to the living area by a female officer to take a bath. Su Lu, however, asked an officer to take him to the cafeteria. Although he had already eaten 4 high-density energy bars in the mech, those things could not satisfy his extremely empty stomach. The second lieutenant in charge of leading the way looked at him with admiration and said, "Lieutenant Colonel Sulu, the food will be here soon." Sulu nodded and suddenly said, "Can you lend me your phone for a moment?" "It would be my pleasure," said the second lieutenant sincerely and happily. In addition to this excited second lieutenant, there were many officers of the airport watching from a distance with curiosity and excitement. In today's military, Sulu was no longer just a name, but a celebrity. Not to mention, at this time, many officers already knew about this young lieutenant colonel's outstanding achievements in today's Federation attack and defense battle. Sulu had just dialed a number when a large pile of plates was placed in front of his table. He stared at the plate of ugly, red food in front of him and was stunned. 5460 Rivers Special Crab, high in protein. "You should need it right now," said the second lieutenant nervously. Sulu stared at the crab on the plate and shook his head. "I don't like to eat this. Please give me a bowl of noodles, preferably a big bowl." Chapter 426. Jian Shuier took a shower very quickly. When the cook in the airport cafeteria brought the carefully cooked noodles to the table, she also came here and sat quietly and obediently across from Sulu. From this point of view, she didn't look like a big star who was popular all over the universe. The girl who had just taken a shower was wearing a dark green military shirt. The collar was tight, but because it was too loose, it always made people want to explore the scenery under the shirt. The fluffy and playful short purple hair was now smooth like a purple satin, sticking to her cheeks. There were a few drops of water at the end of the hair that were crystal clear. She was like a beautiful lotus flower lying on the quiet surface of the water, painted with a layer of strange color by the strange light. Her whole body was oozing wet like the morning fog, moving people. Sulu looked up and asked, "Do you want to eat some?" Jian Shuier tiredly shook her head and said, "I vomited so much that I can't eat anything. I don't know how you can still have such a good appetite." After saying this, she put her head on her arms and rested her head on the table, looking at Su Li's side face with a trace of curiosity and interest. The young girl's face was slightly pale at this moment, but it also carried an unhealthy redness that was caused by the heat and running around. However, her sharp chin rested on her arm, forcibly turning her delicate and tired face into a bit of pure beauty. The pink cheeks around her lips were squeezed until they were slightly puffed up, like a cute little bun, making people want to take a bite out of them. Su Li's hand that was holding the chopsticks slightly froze. He suppressed the surprise in his heart and awkwardly stopped looking at her. He clumsily took the pepper bottle on the table and mechanically poured it into the bowl of noodles. He forced himself not to think that this national girl was staring at him. Relying on his instinct, he began to bravely attack the noodles in front of him. He ate a column of noodles with his chopsticks and drank half a bowl of soup with both hands. The spicy smell of pepper mixed with chili rushed into his nose, making him very comfortable. Sulu ate until his forehead was full of sweat. He was so satisfied that he actually forgot a lot of things, such as the battlefield last night, the smoking corpses in the wilderness and mountains, and Jian Shuier, who was sitting next to him and staring at him seriously at this time. A bowl of noodles was finished. Another bowl of noodles was finished. No one came to disturb the officers of Luochio Airport. The empty hall was quiet. Only the two of them sat in a remote corner by the window. Only the sound of wind sweeping away the clouds sounded. The morning light outside the window gradually crossed the mountain forest and shone on the surface of the building. The slightly white light penetrated the floor glass and reflected on Su Li's sweaty face. Jian Shuier tilted her head and opened her big eyes to look seriously at this ordinary face in the morning light. She knew that this student of her father's would often have an incomparably natural and friendly smile on his face. However, in the cockpit of the Mecha, at certain moments, when his smile would disappear and his face would become serious, there would always be some kind of wonderful light between those ordinary eyebrows. Last night, during the thousands of miles of escape, during the Mecha battle in the valley, she had been sitting quietly and obediently beside Sulu. She had been shaken to the point where it was incomparably painful. However, most of the time, she had been seriously looking at the screen in the Mecha, watching Sulu wearing a helmet, Watching him do many, many things, the more she saw, the more she naturally knew, and the more curious she became. For a woman, curiosity was often a very fatal emotion. However, our nation's maiden had a calm enough heart under her cute and playful appearance. Thus, she was not like the daughter of the Nan Xiang family, who might ruin a person's life the moment she saw him. Until now, she was still just curious. Who knew what this emotion would develop into in the future? Su Lu put down the third empty bowl and rubbed his abdomen in satisfaction. He used the sweaty sleeve of his shirt to randomly wipe his sweat and mouth. Jian Shuier suddenly opened her mouth and asked seriously, "Who did you learn from?" Su Lu was startled, but immediately understood what she was asking. In terms of mecha piloting, he had many teachers. For example, Bai Yulan, Zhou Yu, and even Li Feng, who he had sparred with before. He would never let go of any opportunity to learn and improve himself. Back then, he had relied on that strange mecha battle room in Lihua University and that thin and weak young master of the Tai family to learn the basics. However, in the end, he only had one teacher. It was that teacher who had taught him how to discover, get used to, and use the trembling heat in his body. "It was Uncle who taught me," said Su Lu very seriously. Jian Shuiyer's face showed a trace of peaceful sweetness and pride. She said, "So that father of mine is also very strong?" Su Lu smiled. On the beach outside the Golden Star Hotel, the young girl in front of him had not asked more about Uncle. Now, it seemed that those curiosity and doubts about her birth father had been hidden in her heart all this time. Uncle is a very impressive person. He gazed at Jian Shuier and thought silently to himself that in this part of the universe, probably only that great military god could be a match for Uncle. Right at this moment, the phone beside his hand beeped. Earlier, when he had entered the cafeteria, he had made a call. However, this planet was too far away from the capital ring, so the call took too long. Furthermore, that second lieutenant's authority was too low, so the call was only officially connected after he had finished his noodles. However, it had to be said that the speed at which he ate his noodles was comparable to a hungry ghost about to be reincarnated. The time delay of in-universe instant communication could not be solved. After all, that involved a deeper level of research in quantum physics. Even Professor Shun was unable to touch upon this somewhat mysterious boundary. Sula held the phone and listened to a woman's voice from afar. A woman wearing glasses and greasy work attire appeared before his eyes, but it could not hide her youthful face and great heart. He smiled slightly and said sincerely, "Shangqiu, I receive your note. Thank you for adjusting that guy for me. It's very useful. Without this MX, it would have been very difficult for me to complete this mission. When I get back, I'll treat you to a meal. Right? I've introduced a Chung Fengsher to you. He has some very interesting things in his hands. See if you need them." In terms of mecha, Shangqiu, the first-level technical supervisor of the Nutshell Engineering Department, was unquestionably a genius. Although this genius girl was gradually getting older, other than her youthful appearance, her talent in mecha design had not fallen behind at all. Su Li's gratitude was very sincere because he had been very comfortable controlling the Black MX that night. He knew very well that Shangqiu and those colleagues in the engineering department must have put in a lot of effort in order to modify this mecha. Especially since they did not have their own control data, the amount of calculation required was terrifyingly large. Leaving a note in a mecha. If this was made into a movie, it would definitely be a battlefield romance that would attract countless young girls, said Jian Shuier, looking at him with a smile. Sulu scratched his head. He really did not know how to explain it. There was indeed an indescribable sense of chemistry between him and Shangqiu. Although the two of them had only been able to communicate remotely this past year, whether it was in the development of the MX in the past or in the creation of mecha tutorials later on, this pair of stunningly talented engineering man and woman had always been able to easily understand what the other wanted, thus forming a close collaboration. However, this was definitely not the love between a man and a woman. It was just a natural attraction between living things that shared the same magnetic field. Su Lu thought so, but when he thought of the exaggeratedly soft breasts that had appeared in his mind earlier, he felt that he was lying to himself. He did have a good impression of Zhang Qiu. Right now, he did not have to think about the black-rimmed spectacles wearing Zhang Xiaoming, but he would occasionally think of the spectacle-wearing Zhang Qiu. Su Lu gripped the edge of the table tightly, gazing somewhat uneasily at the morning light outside the window. Suddenly, he thought of the young lady of the Southern Prime Minister family who had courageously expressed her love for him in the Wood Valley Manor. He thought of the warm, peaceful, and comfortable feeling that beautiful girl had brought to him. Suddenly, Su Lu came to a conclusion that made him panic. Could it be that he subconsciously liked all girls who were worth liking? Then what was this? Amorous or universal? Promiscuous or lustful? Had he been led astray by that hooligan Mr. Sure? The morning light was a little blinding. Su Lu quickly turned his head, and then saw Jian Shuier, who was looking at him curiously with her head resting on his arm. He saw that incomparably enchanting little face, that short purple hair that had always existed in his dreams. He could not help but feel confused and even panicked. He quickly stood up, prepared to get as far away from this national girl as possible. Jian Shu opened her ink-black eyes and looked at him in confusion. She asked, "What's wrong?" Su Li's voice was slightly hoarse. "I'm going to rest for a while first, and then I'll fix my mecha. In the next few days, I'll definitely have to go out on missions." Jian Shuier was shocked. She pointed at the white salt stains on the back of his military uniform and asked hesitantly, "Aren't you going to take a shower first?" The afternoon sun shone warmly into the bedroom. Jian Shuier was nestled in bed, eating seriously with a bag of coarse grain biscuits in her hand while looking at the TV screen on the wall. She looked like she was at home, completely different from the scene of war that was going on everywhere on this planet at this time. The Federation's army was fighting a bloody battle, and Jian Shuier was not in the mood to live such a leisurely life. It was just that the Imperial Expeditionary Force's surprise attack plan had been foiled by the Federation, but the entire Luochio spaceport was still in the highest alert state, under strict military control. Although she and Su Lu enjoyed the best military treatment in the spaceport, it was still very inconvenient if they wanted to go out for a walk. Not to mention that the news on the TV was particularly important at this time. On the screen, at the large gathering site of the Charter Square in the Capital Special District, President Pabre, dressed in a black suit, was reading an important announcement to thousands of ordinary citizens of the Federation under the sun. Dozens of years ago, the President of the Federation once said that this is a shameful day. Today, I want to announce to the entire Federation, and even the entire universe, that today is a day that is worth remembering for the rest of our lives. Speaking of this, the dark-skinned President Pabre paused for a moment, as if he was recalling the heavy history of the past. Gradually, a smile appeared on his face, and he looked particularly confident under the sun. "You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.